Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today and enjoy these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon for early access and my podcast in the description. And just quickly before we start, whatever you're dealing with or struggling with, you can get over it and I believe in you. You just have to stay consistent and stay in the fight. I hope you're all doing great and I'll speak to you all soon. Now to set the scene for my story, at the time I was just a broke college kid. I was driving back from the campus back towards where my parents live. Now, I'd been on the road for quite a number of days now, stopping at different motels periodically not to get too tired and fatigued. When I reach my parents' state, it suddenly becomes a lot more wooded, and I guess the air becomes cleaner in some ways. I'm not really too much of a hippie about environmental things, but honestly I think there's a huge difference you find when you get back into the cleaner air states, i.e. the ones with more woods and forests. Now to set the scene a little bit further, at the time of this trip I was pretty tired to be honest and kind of getting fed up of everything. Honestly it feels like no matter how much I work I didn't seem to be getting anywhere. The assignments were basically piling up and I was getting really fed up of it. I mean, I guess a lot of you can relate to this, but at the time I didn't really realise that it was important to manage time, so I'd basically implode every once in a while, hence why I was pretty happy to be driving. Now, to be honest, I really found that I was resetting while driving through those woods. Now, on this particular day in question, I was feeling pretty tired. I've been on the road for a little bit now and I only had myself for company, so to try and make things a little more interesting, I decided that I was going to drive through the woods. Now I mean off the road kind of, well at least a true pavement, onto the kind of gravelly roads until it's basically a forest road. If you live in those kinds of areas you'll know the difference. New to these areas I was not, but this one I was. I pulled onto this main road when it wasn't too dark. The sun was beginning to set and I was basically on the very last stretch. As I turn into this part of the road, I immediately almost run over a rabbit and stop because of it. I feel a bump in the road and I'm convinced that I've just killed the poor thing. I say, oh god, you've got to be kidding me. I really wanted a break from having things on my conscience and already feeling burnt out. It felt like everything was starting to accumulate. I got out and luckily it all seemed to be fine. That was when I noticed someone off the side of the road. I said hey, I almost killed that thing and laughed, hoping they would respond, but they don't seem to say anything. They just stand there, just off to the side of a tree, and don't say a word to me. I realise that I'm not very welcome here and decide that I probably need to get a move on. The person isn't dressed too strange. They have a flannel jacket on, I think that's what they're called, which is kind of a dark yellowy colour, some jeans on and a cap, and I really can't see much else. They seem pretty tall, at least 6 feet, and I don't want to stick around for much longer. Glad that I've not killed the rabbit, I'm happy to set off again, though I have to be a little bit more slow now, as I decide that I'm going to avoid the main road and go off the roads that are kind of more winding and easier to get lost to. I know it's stupid because I thought I was escaping the danger of that person, but instead I was probably getting myself somewhat lost. I take a quick look in the mirror and I can't see them anywhere, so I think I'm fine. While I'm driving, night has started to set quickly, and I turn on the radio for some music. It's just some of the local stations which aren't really good to say the least, so I ended up putting in a cassette tape that I have. And yes, I'm an old person, so we used to use cassette tapes. At the time I was listening to Nirvana, and it was pretty cool. I love Smells Like Teen Spirit, and some of their other classics they had on there. Now the first part of my return goes pretty well. Everything's relatively normal, and I do make way. I'm pretty sure I'm heading in the right direction, but I realised soon that maybe it wasn't a good idea to go off the main path. Where I'm driving, I pretty much come to a snail's pace because of all the trees around me, and I have to be very careful not to go over something that could puncture my tyre. Now the radio cuts in and out basically because I'm going relatively deep into the forest now, so I really have to mind my way because I know I'm kind of getting lost at the same time due to the unresponding radio signal. However, lo and behold, I can see some red lights just up ahead of me, signaling that there's probably another car up there and that I should probably follow them to get back to civilization. I know this is a stupid idea, but when you're lost, it seems like a good one. I turn on my lights momentarily and try and capture what kind of car it is, but it's pretty hard to tell, but it's basically a black truck. I try and get a closer look, but I realise that I can't actually see their lights that well. That's bizarre. It seems like they're driving in the dark and I've only seen the reflection temporarily, or maybe they turned their lights off when they saw me, or they were braking. I wasn't too sure, and then I noticed something else odd. I can't seem to see any kind of registration plate on the truck ahead of me. Now this is probably a bad sign, to be honest, because why would anybody be driving around here without a reg plate? Well, I guess there's probably a good chance that they're up to something dodgy or are not insured, so I decide the best thing I can do now is just keep quite a nice pace behind them. I continue driving regardless and make sure that I keep a distance. It's now blatantly obvious that I'm behind them because of course I'm coming at them with my beams on, so at least I can accept that they know where I am. I continue following for a number of seconds until I seemingly come up right behind them and I realise that they've stopped for some reason. Now this is pretty odd, and you don't really want to have this in the forest. The problem really is that somebody might be coming up behind me now, and I'm not going to be able to escape. I keep looking in my rearview mirror because I'm pretty paranoid that something dodgy is about to happen, but I can't figure out exactly what it could be. I roll down my window for a second about to ask if they need help, but I realise quickly this is a stupid idea, and luckily some higher conscious in my brain kicked in and said, "Get back, don't do this." So I start to reverse my car a little bit. After a few seconds they turn on their lights and I can actually see the rear views a bit, and they start driving. I give them a few seconds to go off and I seem to not be able to catch up with them again. I'm still not exactly sure where I am at this point and it's quite annoying. It's starting to become a little bit foggy at the same time, which is really restricting my visibility. It seems strange because the truck basically went into nowhere and I really can't figure out where they could have possibly gone. Also, the road was pretty cruddy up here. There's these massive holes in the road and I'm really worried that I'm going to bust my tyre or my car. And I know my mum would have killed me if I had done that, and I hate to think what would have happened if my dad caught me in that situation. So I plough onwards just very cautiously. The trees are relatively big at this point, and they're pretty full of life. If I roll down the window just a little bit to get some air, I have to be careful for bugs not to fly in. I think at this time of year especially, they're really in full swing of life, and it's pretty nice on most occasions, just not this one. I continue going down the same path until eventually I make it back onto a main forest road, if that makes sense. I'm very relieved at this point because I'm no longer lost necessarily and I have a rough idea of what direction I have to go in. Basically, this will be pretty much a one-way thing until I get to the main road again, and then I'm only about 50 minutes from home. Success is in sight. I continue driving and realise that my gas isn't too good at the moment, so I have to make sure I get back and don't get stranded out here. Now when I see it this time, it's like it's had a little crash, but almost comical how obviously it's been set up. It literally looks like a truck is crashing into a tree and someone's laying next to it, but there's no damage whatsoever to the truck. While driving a little further, I can catch the reflection of something up ahead. Now I realise that it's the same truck again. This time I can just see the glow of its tail lights. I decide to stop and scope it out. I have some cheap binoculars with me and I try my best to see, but unfortunately, with astigmatism, it just looks like a big blur because of the headlights. God, how are my eyes this bad that I can't even look for danger? I decide to put the binoculars down, actually throwing them back towards me in frustration, and decide that I should very cautiously creep up and investigate what's wrong. Now it appears like the same truck from before has just gone off to the side of the road, and it's perfectly parked in front of a tree. The tree's completely fine, but there seems to be something next to it. I pray to God it's not a body, but something just feels off in this situation. I start to edge closer and closer until I realise that somebody seems to be laying on the ground. They're dressed in basically all black with a strange kind of robe on. It's almost like a cape, but not really, but they just look really out of place in terms of what they're wearing. I then realise that the truck is literally perfectly fine and the tree, and the person, funnily enough, has moved very slightly. I realise that I'm probably in grave danger now, and this is a setup. I feel frozen with fear and don't know whether I can go on or not. I decide the best thing to do now is just reverse the truck, then turn around. I'm keeping my eyes fixated on this person 100% in the road, making sure they don't move, and making sure that there's nobody waiting in the truck for me. The last thing I want to do is get shot by a shotgun, and I'm too young to pass away like this. I slowly back out and look 100% forward the whole time until eventually I round a corner. Now luckily for me, nothing happens at this point. I'm able to turn around and make it onto some more forest roads where I can take the long way round. Now granted, going through the back roads is really a bad idea because this path alone is bad enough, but coming off the road makes it even worse for me. But something is off about this. I know now that I have to get away from this person because something is wrong. I decide to stop for one moment, pick up the binoculars and scout out before I proceed. I quickly turn off all the lights and look in my binoculars. I realise now that if I slowly come out of my car and kind of crawl up to the trees, I can investigate with the binoculars. Feeling truly like G.I. Joe, hell of a name, I decide that I'm gonna do it. I slowly crawl out, making as little noise as possible, still with the engine off and all of the lights. I don't bother locking the door, and I slowly crawl up to the position where I need to scout out what's happening. I can no longer see the figure, but the truck seems to have moved a little bit further. God, I knew they were up to something. Luckily for me, I didn't panic too much. Don't ask me why, I was probably just fed up and wanted to get home. I continue watching and basically nothing happens for a good 2 minutes, me purely fixated on the truck, slowly being caught up with the sounds of the insects and whatnot around me. Suddenly I hear rustling to the left of me. I stop dead in my tracks, not moving another inch from my vantage point. I decide to stay perfectly still, and I can hear this person slowly getting closer and closer to me through the forest. I can hear crunch, crunch, crunch slowly getting louder. I try my best not to look to my left, but I have to. I need to know whether I have to fight or run now. And suddenly, I notice there's a creature on the floor. I don't know exactly what this is, but maybe it's some kind of possum I haven't seen before. It's hard to tell because of all the adrenaline running through my body made my eyes shake a little bit and not focus. I go, God, under my breath, and then immediately back to the truck. Now I realise that the truck is gone, which is really bizarre because I was watching that thing only 10 seconds ago and I didn't hear it move, but maybe just maybe I was so scared that I couldn't really look anywhere else. Now realising that the potential danger seems to be heading off in the opposite direction as me, I decide to wait for a while, but I want to scout out the area before I go any further. I didn't remember to lock the truck at the time, and I considered going back to do it, but realised that I'm going to hear anyone pretty quickly if they go there. I decide to continue on my G.I. Joe mission and crawl up closer and closer to where the truck was. I then begin crawling very slowly and quietly through the leaves, and I realise that I'm not making much sound and I feel pretty safe at the time. My eyes have basically adjusted to the darkness pretty well, and I'm just being more careful not to go into little puddles and things. I don't want to get my clothes crappy, especially not out here. I continue on, and I eventually make it up to the edge of the trees, basically where the road is. Now from here I can see pretty well in both directions, and I can see that the coast is clear. I still have literally no sign of the person or the truck, so I assume that they've gone off in another direction trying to look for me. If they stayed on the main path, which I'm pretty certain they have, then they're not going to be near me. They've probably gone in the opposite direction because I wouldn't have been able to escape otherwise. I decide the best thing to do now is slowly crawl back to my original position. I can hear movement once again. Just the second I start turning and I duck down, I bury myself in leaves and wait. I can hear a click 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 around me with twigs breaking. I can hear this continuing for a few seconds, but it sounds just like the animal I heard before, so I'm suddenly at ease again. Now I'm not 100% convinced that this is what happened, but I'm far quieter now just in case, and decide to lay buried as long as I can. I think I'm pretty well buried, and I'm just getting annoyed at the smell of the leaves around me. They smell absolutely disgusting. I wait here for a good 10 minutes until I start to get quite cold quite quickly, and realise that once again I should really be getting on the move. And I take the leaves off myself, now realising that I wasn't as well hidden as I thought I was. Now one strange thing during this is I can see a red light in the trees, maybe 4 or 5 feet in the air. I don't know what it was, and I only saw it for about 5 seconds, but it definitely distracted me. I then realised that I have to crawl back, and I should probably stay as quiet as I can to do so. I turn round and I start making my way towards the truck again. Now everything's normal at first, and I don't really have anything concerning. Every so often I can hear the sounds of animals around me, but I kind of come at one with nature at this point, and I'm not really bothered by them now, and I'm pretty sure I can differentiate the difference between those and people. Whoever was trying to get me is now long gone, and I slowly make it back to my truck. Now I'm glad that I didn't bother locking it before, because it would have made far too much sound, and I jump back in. I put the ignition in, and I do something relatively stupid. I don't turn on any lights whatsoever. I'm worried it's going to draw attention to me, and my night eyes are pretty well adjusted now. I turn off some of the lights inside the cabin that I can control, and I very slowly start reversing back out the way I've come. Now to say this was difficult would be an understatement, especially because some condensation is built up on the rear mirror and the rear window, but I make it somehow. Now I was doing some incredible reverse driving here that I really wish some other people could have seen. I eventually make it back onto the path, and I take a look to my left and right and can't see anything or anyone. Presuming it's safe now, I start off. Now maybe adrenaline or senses are caught up with me after my adrenaline dump, because I end up going very quick. While driving I notice a small little cabin building just off to the right of the road, but it looks like it's been long abandoned. I'm driving very quick and some rain has picked up at this point. I decide that I have to put on the lights because it's too dangerous now and I really can't see where I'm going. I went over a bump slightly too quick in the road and I skid, I'm not kidding, seconds from hitting a tree. I managed to kind of oversteer around the tree and I cursed myself for being so stupid. It then dawns on me that if I drive at this pace I'm probably going to catch up with whoever's ahead of me. I then realise the best thing I can do is turn my normal beams on and flash my full beams periodically just so I can illuminate corners. But of course the issue with doing so is that it's going to notify everyone around me as to exactly what I'm doing right now. I continue driving at a more normal pace and I realise that I have to do this or I'm going to run out of fuel pretty soon. While driving, I'm suddenly met with a flash of light. It kind of dazes me for a millisecond and I'm partially blinded. Suddenly I can see well again and I realise that it was a lightning bolt. A few seconds later, I almost jolt forward and fall out of the driving seat because the loudest thunder I've ever heard in my life seems to have gone off at that exact moment I was driving. Most likely heightened from this situation, I feel really scared again. What's worse is the trees are getting much bigger where I am now, and it's making driving very difficult. I decide to turn on my high beams for most of this part of the journey, though I know it's not good for my car battery, and at the time my car was pretty old, so this is an issue. Around another corner and the rain's picked up a lot and I go through quite a big puddle, and I kid you not, the car stopped. I pull my head back and say, God, you've got to be kidding me. This literally looks like that scene in Jurassic Park when the car breaks down and the dinosaur comes. I didn't have one of those cool Jeep things and I don't have a sunroof to look out of, but God, I was scared. I ended up punching the steering wheel, and luckily it didn't set off the car horn because that would have easily notified others of my position. I quickly turned my head around, scouting all around me looking for anyone else that could either help me or might be a danger, and I don't see anyone. I jump out of the car and quickly start pushing it. I managed to just about get it off of a rock that it was stuck under. I mean, that's probably an exaggeration, but I just kind of shimmied it into a better position. I start kicking some more rocks and things around so I can clear up a path, and my tyre is now free again. I quickly jump back in and my feet are soaked, and luckily the car starts now. Luckily for me, no dinosaurs come to eat me. I then turn off of another forest road, and I know exactly where I am now. I'm not far from a main road and God, I'm excited. Just before I turn on, I stop to give way to potential oncoming traffic, and my hands tighten on the steering wheel. At first I'm not sure exactly why I'd done this, then a second later I realised that my subconscious has noticed car beams come in. I quickly turn off the engine and all of the lights with it, and I duck down in my seat. Another car's coming. Then it hits me, it looks just like the truck I've seen before. I lay as low as I can as it slowly passes me, quickly jumping up when it's about to round the corner. Then I realise that it has a license plate. It's a different car. I let out a sigh of relief as I realise that I'm probably a little too paranoid from what happened. I start my engine again and then turn onto the road. Now for the first couple of minutes of driving, I'm going at a ridiculous speed again, kind of neglecting my fuel. I realise soon that this is a pretty bad idea because I'm not actually sure where the next gas station is. I drive for another 10 minutes until eventually I make it back to roughly where civilization should start, and I know a gas station isn't too far away. Now on this drive, I basically put down those people to playing a cruel prank on me, or maybe they thought it was a friend of theirs or God knows what, and I've actually calmed myself down a lot. I decide that I'm not going to report it to anyone, I'm just going to go asleep, and I know for a fact that if I tell my parents, they're never going to forgive me for driving this course alone, and they're going to demand that they go and pick me up from my college, and that's not going to happen. I don't need the embarrassment from them, thank you. So, I continue on. I eventually pull into a gas station, and my God, I've never seen such a middle of nowhere one as this. To say it looked creepy would be an understatement, and I'm very tempted to go back into the forest again because I'd rather deal with whatever was out there than this place, but I don't have much of a choice. My meter is just over empty and I'm on an incline, so that's probably accounting for it having that little bit above it. I sigh and say fine, if I've got to go in, I've got to go in, and I close the door and step out into another puddle. God, this can't get any worse, I say to myself. I decide with the $10 I had remaining in my wallet that I'm gonna spend $7 on gas, and I'm gonna use the other 3 on getting some kind of food or whatever as a treat. As I get closer, I realise that this isn't really going to be an easy gig, because there's not much food in there, which does actually annoy me because I'm quite hungry, and they only have them small portable gasoline things that you can fill up when it's an emergency. I walk in there and I realise that they have some chocolate bars, and I'm quite delighted. I say, hey, how much for the gas and how much for the chocolate? Clearly with a $10 in my hand. And the attendant says, well, $2 for the chocolate or $10 for the gas. And I regret to say that I had to get the gas at this point, and I hand over the money. Now the person working in there, the only person in there I should say other than me, seems really weird. He seems to hold eye contact for far too long after you've said something, and I just get a really weird uneasy feeling off this guy. He has a weird moustache. He's dressed in a one-piece overall like he's just come out of a farm, and it looks like he doesn't know what the 21st century is. He's about 6 feet tall, and I start to realise that he's kind of matching the description of the person I saw earlier. The clothes are a little different, yeah, but he just gives me really weird vibes that I've not really experienced before. He holds his eye contact for far too long every time, and it really annoys me. I go to leave, then he says, where are you from? Out of town? I think, oh god, this is the end for me, and I start panicking and start looking towards the exits quickly. I do so very blatantly because he says, relax, relax, we're not all gonna kill you out here, which made me feel 10 times worse. I then say, no, I'm from very close to here, I'm just on the way home from college. He says, college? What do you need that for? I don't actually bother explaining the course I'm taking because I'm sure he's not going to understand it or why I'm doing it. Though he keeps on pestering on, and I tell him that I'm doing business. He laughs and says, business? I didn't need a business degree to get in here. Then says how it's a waste of money and starts blaming the government and other things along those lines. He then says, no really, what are you doing out here? I then feel very uneasy, and I take a few steps back, and he says again, I'm not gonna kill you, but what were you and your friend doing out here? I'm very worried now that this guy is absolutely off his head, and he's just imagining that someone else is there, and maybe he sees people. I say, no one's with me. He says, why didn't he come in the store with you? I say, what do you mean? He says, who is that just got out of your car? I say, no one, somewhat angrily. He says, I literally saw someone get out of your car, stand in the middle of the car park, just stare at you for a good 4 minutes, and walk off into the forest. The penny dropped. I turn around, then turn to the store attendant, then once more. I tried to speak, but no words can come out. I just quickly tell him to lock the door, lock the door. Thankfully he follows this and says, what's wrong? What is wrong? And sits me down, but I'm too scared to move. I then barely get the words out and explain, I think someone's followed me. I'd come here on my own. Then it hits me of what happened moments earlier. The truck I saw earlier. I start crying a little bit with the fear, and he manages to calm me down and says, don't worry, I'm gonna go and look. You're safe here. He quickly goes to grab something from the back, unlocks the door, then runs out. He's gone out there with a shotgun, I realise, and I tell myself, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. Terrified, I quickly go and lock the door because I'm worried that I'm gonna get followed once again. I don't know whether this person is playing some kind of big game on me, and this is all just fun for him, and he's the one in the truck. I can't be sure, but he's gone outside with the gun into the darkness as the rain falls down. I can hear the occasional lightnings, and that really makes it feel like it's a horror movie right now. I put my hand in my head and close my eyes, and I hear bang 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 on the door. I look up and thank God it was the store attendant again. He says, hey, what are you doing? Let me in. And I apologise and quickly open the door. He said, hey, whoever that is long gone now, but I want you to see this. He takes me outside with him still with the shotgun, which is probably the only reason that I went outside with him. You can see some muddy footprints that lead from the opposite side of my car away from the driver's side that stand exactly like the guy just described to me, then slowly fade off into the forest. This guy was telling the 100% truth. There was someone in my car that I have no idea about that was in there for God knows how long with me. The attendant then says, "Quick, we're coming inside and calling the police," and I have to thank him for this. We get back inside and he makes me a coffee quickly for free. He then hands me the phone and he says, "I've dialed it for you." An officer picks up and I report exactly what's happened, and they say they're going to send someone out to investigate. I say, "Do you want me to wait here?" And they say, "No, it's not necessary." And they then send out their squad and hang up. I then thank the store attendant profusely and I apologise for being so paranoid, but he said it's understandable. He said there's people out here that you don't ever want to mess with, and he said he's heard some stories. He then says that he'll follow me out to my car, but he can't go any further. I thank him profusely again and he says it's nothing, and turns around cold-heartedly almost and heads back into the store. I then get in my car again, and again I'm ashamed to say it, but I absolutely floor it, going way too quick. The next 30 minutes or so of the drive feel like an absolute blur, and I eventually make it back onto the road that leads to my parents' house, back to true civilization. I pull into my parents' driveway, park up and quickly go to bed. Everyone else is asleep now. It's almost 3 in the morning. I ended up hitting the sheets and waking up the next day feeling exhausted. I didn't tell my parents what happened, and my dad jokes and said, "How'd you get caught out in the rain?" I never had the heart to tell them, even to this day, because I know how much it would have scared them. I tried to follow up and get answers from the police about what happened, but they didn't give me any information and said the investigation's still ongoing. This all happened years ago, and I still have no idea who is in my car with me, or for how long, or what they planned on doing to me. When I was a kid, my family and I were hiking in the mountains. We got to a small clearing at the end of a dirt road and we saw a red convertible with its doors open. My dad said, "Wait guys, let's check this out." He walked around the car a few seconds and then immediately started speed walking towards us. He didn't even look back at us and just said, "Let's go now." I was curious, so I started to walk over to the car but saw several bullet holes and blood on the seats. I ran back and said, "Dad, what happened?" He said, "I don't know, but the hood was warm. It still gives me chills." One of the more weird experiences of my life was while driving through the woods in pretty much the middle of nowhere. My car seemed to stop completely randomly, and I thought there was hailstones outside. There was prodding on the top of my car, then the sides, even to the point that I could actually see the impact on the window, but there was no hailstones whatsoever. It was literally like hundreds of people were punching the sides of my car, and suddenly it stopped, like nothing ever happened. It was so scary that I didn't inspect the car until I got to my destination, but I could clearly see some dents in the side of it, like people had been punching it or throwing rocks, but there was no rocks or anything. So one night, I was walking to my friend's house from my grandpa's. The fastest route was to actually cut through a trailer park surrounded by woods. There was a path if you knew the correct yard to trespass, sneaking through a family's yard. Now I finally come to the edge of the woods, only to see very distinct orbs of lights about the size of softballs hovering in front of me. I froze and stare at them for a while, kind of squinting, cocking my head back to see what the hell they are. I decided to approach them and then they flew away. Now I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I still don't know what I saw to this day. Now this is going to be very long, and everything's based on real life events. So my family owns a lot of property in Heltus, Texas. One ranch actually has a ton of history. Now I grew up on this ranch, and my dad owns a small single-wide trailer. We were neighbours with my tia and tio. They're about 100 yards to the left of us. The back of our trailer is really close to thick woods, so it didn't really have a backyard. We are kind of plopped right in the middle with the woods, but our driveway was connected to the main dirt road, if that makes any sense. Well, I always felt creeped out around the backyard area and our back door. Like I said, we didn't have a backyard. It was a heavy uncleared wooded area. We never used the back door, and it was always locked with one of those chains that went inside. I was actually a very active kid. I couldn't sit still or inside and chill. I always had to be outside exploring. Usually my cousins and I would explore the ranch, build forts and ride four-wheelers, but there were times when we would go exploring, but I would go off on my own. I remembered one time I was looking around the trailer alone, trying to find a good spot to build a fort. I was about 8 then. I went right to the end of the trailer to explore. Now this area had a large cleared brush. Behind me was the wooded area. I remembered walking around focusing on finding a good fort spot when out of nowhere I felt very uneasy. My attention immediately went back to the wooded area. I felt as though someone was staring at me. The feeling was so intense, I literally booked it into my house. I remembered that I wasn't really sure exactly who was there, but I just knew someone was near and staring at me. There was another time too, not too long after, that I started experiencing weird things, where I came home from my cousin's house and gone to get some clothes since I was staying the night with her around 9 PM. My cousin's driveway connects to the main dirt road in the same area as my driveway. Anyway, when I opened the front door and walked into the trailer, I noticed the back door was completely open. Again, I was staying at my cousin's house, right next to the driveway over, and my dad was down the road at a local bar. There was no one at the trailer for hours. My dad never opened the back door ever for any reason. I immediately felt very spooked and tailgated it back to my cousin's house without getting the clothes where I initially went to pick it up. Now there's many other weird things that my cousins and I experienced on the ranch, but this experience is by far the most alarming. It was during the summer of '07, so we're about 12 at the time. We were at my cousin's house, and my dad took us to Hollywood Video earlier that day to rent a movie. This is what he did to make up for being at the bar until around 2 AM. So we ended up renting the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and decided to watch it until around 1 AM. We chose to rent this movie and watch it at the time because we love to get spooked. Well, after we had finished the movie, it's around 2 AM and we're still up and want to play or party around. So we decided that we would walk to my trailer and pick up the boombox so we could listen to our CDs we'd just burnt on LimeWire and jam out and dance. Remember, my cousin's driveway is connected to the main road parallel to where my driveway was. We went to walk in, and out of nowhere we hear a chainsaw going off in the hill about 50 yards to the left of us, way too close for comfort. Again, this was 2 AM in the middle of nowhere. All the land surrounding us is owned by a close family. No one would ever go there to clear the land or operate a chainsaw, not at 2 AM in the dark. We had to use a flashlight to see the dirt road in front of us, that's how dark it is. When we heard the chainsaw, we all paused and looked at each other confused. Once we processed what we're hearing, we ran as fast as we could, and make it to the trailer just about over to my cousin's house. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't home. He was out doing whatever he was doing, so we couldn't tell him about what we just heard or ask for a ride back to the cousins. Now none of us even had a cell phone at the time. We ended up grabbing my loaded .22 and walking back with it in hand. Now luckily we never heard that chainsaw again. Now to this day, my cousins and I are perplexed over this experience. There's literally no logical explanation for the chainsaw we heard at like 2 AM. In a weird way, it almost sounded like a very loud recording of a chainsaw rather than an actual one. Again, none of my family would wake up at 2 a.m. and start clearing land/brush, or play with a very loud chainsaw recording for any reason. I feel especially weirded out because at the time we just finished watching that particular film. Even though we were trying to get spooked, we know it wasn't just in our heads because we all heard it and we weren't expecting to hear it either. We all heard it as clear as day at the exact same time. My cousins and I told our family about the experience multiple times. My family is always weird. My dad got short with us and said, well, shouldn't have been out there at that time. My tia said something like, well, this is why we always tell you to get back inside after the dark. Now, for some extra info, our family has been in Texas since it is a part of Mexico. My cousins and I are part of Daughters of the Republic of Texas, and our history runs deep. We also have native/indigenous lineage. However, I don't know too much about it, but anyway, I was very creeped out by this, and hope to get some answers. So this happened on Thursday, and I want to know what you guys think. Okay, so I totally understand if no one believes me, but we're still unsure of what happened, so let me explain. On Friday, we're making our way to Clark Summit. As we were walking, now one by one we noticed that we're veering off the trail. I said to my friend in front of me why he's going off the trail, and he said to our friend who is in front the same thing. The friend told us, I can hear a woman talking, can't you guys hear it? Now we can't hear anything. We tried to convince her to leave it because it's already kind of dark, and we were close to where we wanted to set up camp on the trail. The friend in the front is female, and insisted what she heard sounded like a woman calling for help, and it sounded like it was really close. She said she felt like she is inclined to investigate a possible female in distress. While we're totally okay with going about our business, really. Okay, so I got a bit spooked at first hearing that because she's obviously serious, and we're absolutely certain we can't hear whatever she is. Here's where it gets weird. We only veered off the trail about 300 to 400 meters, yet at one point, we're completely lost. We don't have any fancy gear or GPS stuff because we never really needed it. But we've been on this trail long enough to know that we haven't gone far yet. Yet, we couldn't find any trail or direction after walking for a good 20 minutes. I started to feel weird and really lightheaded, and when I mentioned this to another, they said they felt the same. Now, this was already getting pretty strange. It was like something changed the environment around us, or moved us somehow to another location. I have no idea which way to go, and now it was fully dark. My female friend said she also heard the woman say that I'm over here and please help, saying it sounded like Curtin crying. So now we're somewhat lost after only walking for about 20 minutes off a large trail because my friend is hearing voices. We decided to stop walking in any direction because the last thing that we wanted to do is get lost in the dark. Now we had 2 tents, yes, and sleeping bags in our packs, so we found a clearing and set up. We figured once the sun was out, we would easily find our way back off to the trail. Before we could even lay out the rest, I noticed a tree near us was moving as if someone was climbing it. Now, it was really dark. I wear glasses, so I really struggled to see. So then I called them over to see. I thought it was an animal at first, but it wasn't. It wasn't anything. I could see the outline of what was roughly a human shape, but it was transparent, like completely see-through. That's the best way to describe it. It's similar to the way that heat waves move on the pavement and whatnot. It's the same effect. They see it too. My male buddy said to me, "What are we looking at?" And when we finally spot it, they all said the same thing, transparent but still visible through the foliage. We all just stood there, still whispering theories back and forth as to what we were looking at. I thought maybe it was some kind of optical illusion, but they both immediately jumped to aliens, of course. The thing just sat there, perched on a large branch about 50 feet up. It was like it was watching us. The other oddity is that after staring at this thing for about 10 minutes, the rest of the forest sounds seemed to go back to normal. Now this was really odd. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I have goosebumps all over me for realizing that it suddenly went silent for no reason. After about 10 minutes of us standing there, whatever this thing was started climbing up the tree and ever more, until we can't really see it anymore. We approached the base of the tree slowly, walking in a circle with our nets cranked up trying to see it. It was too dark, and the trees were too close up for us to see the top. We didn't hear it jump to another tree, so we assumed it was still up there. We're all obviously spooked, so we're not really sure what to do at this point. Now after 5 minutes of walking, we managed to get back on the trail. Now I literally dropped my bag and said, "What the hell?" And we all stood there very confused, trying to confirm what we were seeing. Now my buddy likes to joke and said maybe we walked through some hallucinogenic spores and had imagined all of it, but I highly doubt that. But whatever happened, it seemed kind of like, I guess, predatory. Like something was luring us, trying to confuse us. My friend still thinks that we were messing with her and not hearing the woman. Was it that thing we saw imitating a woman? Did we get lost on the trail? This is easily the weirdest thing that I've ever seen in my life, and we still don't have a good theory as to what we saw. I mean, this thing wasn't an alien potentially, but it seemed to be humanoid, but it was 100% transparent somehow, able to climb a large tree without making any noise. I truly don't know what we encountered this day. While working as a park ranger, it wasn't uncommon to get calls out to investigate fires, and that happened one day, and boy, I'll never forget it. I headed over to a reported area, and there was already a few other police there and firefighters. They had already checked out the area and knew nobody was in there. I went to go and look at a cabin just before it collapsed, and I kid you not, I saw a dark figure come, stand perfectly in the middle of the flaming doorway, and not move even once it collapsed. They remained completely black amongst the fire, and seemingly just vanished after that. I wasn't sure whether somebody was there and maybe just somehow melted, but we searched through the whole area and there's literally no one. Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. If you want early access to all of my new videos, then make sure you check out my Patreon in the description where you can hear the MP3 version much earlier than the normal release. To make sure you check out the podcast in the description, where I also add my videos in a few days after they've been uploaded to YouTube. I hope you all enjoyed these stories because I actually really enjoyed narrating them. I love fire tower stories, and I think it's such an interesting job to have in America or wherever you can do it. Before the video starts, I'd like to share this too. So when you're dealing with mental health or mental health issues, I think it's important to try not to let it get on top of you too much and seek out help before it gets too bad, because sometimes you can get lost in your thoughts and trapped in your mind, and you don't need to be, and you don't deserve to be. If you seek out therapy and the right support, it can turn it all around for you. And also, if you're struggling with life generally and feel like things are getting on top of you, sometimes you need to just calm down, just write out the things you need to do. If there's anything you can't do because it's too much work, you just have to accept it and just slowly break it down and get on with it and just calm down. Because things aren't always as bad as they seem, and sometimes it's just a case of your mind calming down so you can slowly start and work through it, and then you'll feel a lot better. So I hope that can help some people, and I hope you enjoyed these stories. Take care, I'll speak to you all soon. The following isn't my own story, it's actually my father's. So my father worked as a fire lookout worker. Basically, it meant that he spent a lot of time up in the fire towers, usually by himself, and he would have to patrol every so often around where his tower was, make sure no one was doing anything wrong, and mostly just keep an eye out for any fires. Now, he'd done this job for a long time. He had a career that was at least 5 years long in this. He did other things too, but he said this was his absolute favourite thing in the world to do. He loved it when he could look around and not see anyone for miles. For myself, I think I'd get a lot more bored of this, but I guess back then it was more fun, because there wasn't as much to do, I suppose. Now, my dad said that sometimes he would communicate with other workers in nearby fire towers with their radios. This was his most favourite thing to do because it could get lonely up there sometimes. He had a buddy, Ryan, who he would regularly communicate with. They would often work similar shifts, and they would actually go out drinking with each other sometimes when they weren't working, of course. Now, in my dad's job, some nights he would have to stay up in the tower for quite a few days on his own. Again, this is something he had no problem with. However, he did have 2 or 3 scary stories that I'd like to share with you all. Now, the first was on one particular evening. My dad says that it was extremely cold. He doesn't know why, it was just almost like the atmosphere was thicker, like when there's fog everywhere, but at the time there wasn't any. He said because of this, he had a very big heavy winter coat on, but he was also having issues with connecting to the radio correctly. Apparently there was some kind of moisture in the air, which meant the electronics, which were more simple back then, weren't working very well. So anyway, there's nothing much for my dad to see, and he decides to lay in his bed for a few minutes just to rest his back. At the time he was doing some drawings and needed to rest his eyes too. He did notice something rather odd though. He could see a light off in the distance. Now, of course, he grabs his binoculars and has to make sure there's no fire. As he does this, he realizes that he can't actually focus on whatever this is. It's a red color like a burning ember, but there's no smoke, and it doesn't seem to be spreading. It doesn't seem to be too big too. My dad decides that he better go and investigate it, so grabs his coat and heads down. As he heads down, he realizes just how cold it is. He's annoyed because he has to leave his warm tower station and he can't be bothered to walk that far, but he has to do it because of course this is a part of his job. He realizes as soon as he gets down that he can't actually see where the fire or light is coming from. Of course this is a little bit concerning for my father because there could be a much bigger fire and maybe smoke's concealing it. But then again, surely he would have seen something by now. So as he heads off in the direction where he saw the light coming from, he gets a strange feeling that he's being watched that he just can't shake. He doesn't let this deter him, however, and he continues towards where the light is supposed to be. He wonders now if maybe his mind was playing tricks on him and it was where his eyes were strained, because he's walked out to nearly exactly where the fire or torch was and he literally can't see a thing. He takes a while to look around and just smell if there's anything burning. He can't smell a thing, and he realizes that he's come a long way from the tower now. Clearly there's nothing too pressing. My dad then decides to turn back. Just as he's walking away, he can hear a strange chanting sound in the distance, almost like somebody singing but more rhythmic. My dad says that it only lasts for 1 single second, but he's pretty sure he heard it. It could always be an illusion of his imagination, but he said it sounded too real. He's a little concerned now and decides to head back. While he's doing so, he's convincing himself that this is all in his mind and there's nothing to be worried about, and he heads back to the fire station. When he gets up to the fire station, he realizes something really odd. Now, there's not only one torch exactly where my dad's just come from, but there's multiple. and they're all about exactly the same height. My dad then gets his binoculars and still can't differentiate exactly what he's seeing. He goes to radio it in to his buddy Ryan, but he can't get any signal because of the electronics playing up. He realizes this is quite a big issue now, because if there is actually a fire, he's not going to be able to let anyone know, and he'll have to quickly get into the truck and go over to the next station where Ryan is and let him know. Now my dad's growing quite concerned at this point. He decides to step outside of the actual cabin windows of the fire tower for a closer look with the binoculars. As he does so, he realizes that something's off now. He can actually see clearly because the glass isn't distorting his view of whatever this is, and he notices that whatever this is seems to be holding up a torch. He can't make out exactly what it is because it's entirely black, but my dad realizes that there's at least 5 of these things now, all moving around very slowly with the torches. That's when it hits him. He held his breath for just a second, and he can hear the chanting again. Again, very rhythmic, but multiple now. My dad soon realizes that something's very wrong. What's worse is he has some of his lights on, and of course they're not going to know exactly where he is. So he quickly goes back inside and hits the light. He needs to be quiet, and he needs to not be seen for this moment. My dad lays down trying to figure out exactly what to do just outside of the cabin near the stairs. He quickly looks down, and thankfully there's none of them figures coming towards him. At first he thinks maybe there was some kids playing pranks on him, but why on earth would they be out here at this time, this far away from everything, where you can only get in trouble? He then sees 2 or 3 more lights appear, and eventually he realizes that there's 10 of these figures holding up the torches, and every so often he'll hear the chanting sound. Then, just as soon as it arrives, it fades out into the distance. My dad decides to be brave and hold his ground for as long as he possibly can, but he understands that he's now in a situation that maybe he can't deal with. "Ryan! Ryan!" he screams onto the radio, but doesn't get a response. All he can hear is static. My dad doesn't have any weapons with him, and he's now concerned for his life. Just how many of these things are there out here, and what do they want? He very hesitantly takes the first step towards his truck, but he realizes that he hasn't checked down the stairs. Maybe, just maybe, he's safer up the fire tower. But then again, what if they set fire to this with the torches, whatever they are? He remains there for what feels like an eternity, but says was probably only another 5 minutes. To his horror, he realizes that these figures are actually getting closer to him and his fire tower. He has no choice now but to go down. He's fighting with every step the urge to immediately run back up and just scream and lock himself in the top, but he knows he can't do it. He takes some very slow steps down, hoping not to be heard, but soon realizes that these things are picking up pace. He bolts down all of the stairs in what must have been record time, and he just makes it towards his truck. Just as he gets in the truck, he realizes that he doesn't have his keys with him and he has to go back up. He was so scared that he literally couldn't think straight. He then starts bolting it up the stairs again, and he luckily finds the keys. He's too scared to actually look up as to how close these things have got to him, and he just runs all the way back down. The moment he steps foot onto the ground again, he can hear them much closer this time, making a whispering sound. The torches have gone out, but he can actually figure out where they are by the sounds, and from what my dad told me, it couldn't have been more than 20 meters away. He quickly gets into the truck and drives as quick as he possibly can over to Ryan. He doesn't look behind him as he's peeling away, and he can hear something getting closer to him in the tree line as he's pulling away. He was too scared to even look to the side to figure out exactly what it could be. Again, in record time, he makes it over to the other fire tower, where his friend Ryan's angry at him for not answering any of the radio calls. He then explains exactly what happened, and Ryan goes pale as a ghost. Ryan explains that he too has spotted them before, but he was too scared to tell anyone in case they didn't believe him or thought he was going crazy. They ended up calling it into the station and they launched an investigation to find out exactly what was out there. Unfortunately, they needed my dad and Ryan to be part of that, but they both agreed it was okay if they did most of it in the truck and let the other rangers take over and figure out what was going on. After hours of investigating, nobody could find anything. Luckily, another worker took over the tower for that day, and my dad still gets chills when he talks about it. He doesn't know exactly who or what it was out there, but the thing that scares him most is whatever these things were, they move far too quick to be human. He said it could just be because of the adrenaline and panic setting in, but he's honestly never seen anything like it. Another one of my father's stories is when he was working in the towers during one summer's evening. He said he kept on hearing suspicious noises around where he was set up during the day, and he thought it was just animals. He didn't know exactly what animal it was, but something kept on climbing up the steps, chewing part of the steps away, then running off with whatever food it could on the stairs or left around. My dad said he didn't mind and actually encouraged it, thinking it was probably a cute squirrel or something, leaving peanuts and whatnot. My dad always made sure that he didn't leave them too high up in case the thing fell, but he said he realised that in previous days, the trailings were getting progressively closer to where he was sleeping, and he thought it was pretty odd because one morning last week he had woken up to see some peanuts crunched on the floor right outside of the window where he was sleeping. After that he decided to not do it anymore. So anyway, my dad kept on hearing noises but thought it was probably nothing, and just continued on with the rest of his shift. He was periodically checking around and reading and listening to the radio. It eventually comes to the next morning, and this is a very cold day in particular. My dad says that what he saw next is one of the most scary things that he ever saw in his life. He goes to open the door and there's frost on all of the windows. Just as he does that, he can clearly see handprints outside of the door at human height. Also, he steps out to find a note saying, "Why no peanuts?" Of course my dad reported it, and they did some investigations but couldn't really find anything. They tried to tell him that it was kids playing a prank on him or maybe just a homeless person, but why would a homeless person be out there in the woods? And what kind of people would play a prank like that on my dad, where clearly they were going to get arrested for it and could get in big trouble or really hurt? My dad also doesn't understand how they got up the station so quietly. After this experience, my dad said that he always made sure the door was locked, and that he would never ever leave food out again, for animals or anything. My dad's final story isn't his own one, but actually his friend, Ryan. Now you may recall me talking about Ryan in the first story. So basically, Ryan was stationed in another tower pretty close to my dad's, but you'd have to drive to get there in any kind of decent time. Now, on one particular summer, my dad's friend Ryan realised that there was a fire, or at least the embers from one, and he has to go and investigate quickly. He radios it in, and he quickly goes down to get into his truck to try and drive over there and see how bad it is. He eventually gets to the source of the fire and realises that it's a huge blazing inferno. He couldn't see it too well because it was over a hill line, but he's very scared that this is going to spread badly, so he quickly tries to radio it in, but he can't get any signal on the walkie-talkie. He speeds in his truck to get back to his own fire tower, but he realises there's lots of smoke ahead. He rolls up the windows so he can continue breathing half-decent air, and just as he does so, he slams the truck to a halt. Up ahead he can see his very own tower on fire, and the trees around it burning. He quickly drives off in the opposite direction to my dad's tower, and they call it in. Turns out there's an absolutely huge inferno, and it takes days for them to put out the fire. Luckily nobody was hurt from this and they just think it occurred naturally. But one terrifying detail for Ryan is that his fire tower had collapsed due to the blaze, and had he have not left about 20 minutes sooner, fell asleep or anything, he would have died in the fire tower. I'd worked in the fire towers for a long time, and I wasn't really scared of much, but there was one particular thing that I can never forget and still is kind of glued into my mind. So, on one particular area that we would go to, we would have lots of reports of a strange man with a backpack sprinting through the forest. We were sure he was homeless. That was until we realised from some of the other fire tower workers that this exact thing had been reported for over 50 years there. They even given him a nickname, the Cheetah, because he doesn't stop running. Now what's pretty scary about this is no one's ever seen his face or can actually confirm exactly what the hell it is. I did have a few times that I was stationed at night and I would actually hear some sounds rushing through the trees. I was convinced it was a bear, so I'd quickly go and get my mace, but every single time I went down, I would just capture the glimpse of something running off that was too small to be a bear, but big enough to be a person, and nothing more. I was convinced it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but who knows. Well, I guess I found out one particular evening. Now, I pretty much let it fall into the depths of my mind and presumed that this was just my mind playing tricks on me because hey, I can remember a time that I was stationed out here before where I'd driven up to my tower one day and I could see my tower on fire. I quickly turned around to see if there was any other signs of smoke, looked back, and it was completely fine. It turned out that my mind had started playing tricks on me because I'd been on my own for so long, and I managed to get sent home for a few days to recover. But anyway, on this one particular evening, some other guys had radioed in that they had reports of somebody running through the forest. I assumed it was a homeless person or a lost hiker and was pretty worried, so I decided to investigate from the top of my tower. I have my binoculars out and I'm looking literally everywhere for any sign of this thing or person. And what do you know? I can't find anything. Just as I'm doing this, I pushed too far and I dropped my flashlight all the way down. It immediately goes out and I'm really annoyed. That was my main one with the spare battery in. I had no choice but to go down in the dark and investigate. Annoyed, I put my binoculars to the side. I make my way down the steps and I have this strange feeling that I'm being watched. Just as I get to the very bottom of the stairs, I hear this strange screaming sound in the distance. I almost have a heart attack until I realise it must be an animal. But this sounded far too powerful and it almost went through me. I quickly reacted by grabbing my flashlight and realised that it's completely dead. Just as that happens, I hear a scream again. This time, fight or flight takes over and I drop the flashlight and I sprint all the way back up to the top of the tower and lock the door. I hate to admit it, but I actually barricade myself in, quickly call into the radio that something strange is happening, and cower there for about 5 minutes. I realise I have to investigate and convince myself I'm just being stupid. I grab my binoculars and, feeling more confident now that help is on its way, I head down the stairs slowly. I can't actually see exactly where the flashlight is, and I need to make it to the bottom. Just as I do that, I'm met with that running thing. It's exactly like it's been described to me. It's like somebody sprinting through the forest at full speed with a big backpack on, who's too dark to really make out exactly what they are. I've rubbed my eyes for a second thinking this can't be real, and just like that, it's gone. I decide I've seen far too much now, and quickly go back up the tower and decide to ask how long the guys are gonna be. Just as I get up there, I can see a light off in the distance. It's not just any light, it's a flashlight. It's going far too quickly through the trees. I look through my binoculars and I can just about see the slow fading out light of clearly a flashlight. I don't believe what's happening, and then, after sitting there in disbelief for what feels like an eternity, it was probably only 10 or so minutes when I hear my buddy's truck pull up with support. As I get down, I realise that that's my flashlight gone. I just start connecting the dots and say what's happened, and one of the much older workers there says, "Hey, did that running guy steal your flashlight? Yeah, we kind of figured out when you called it in, don't worry about it. We don't know what this is too, but you'll be fine. Don't worry, one of us is going to stay here with you for tonight." I try to explain what's happened, but they all seem to be aware of it like they've encountered it before. I was convinced it was my mind playing tricks on me, but now, I don't really know what to think. I was too scared to even rest for the rest of the shift up in the tower, and they put me with a new guy who was also just as confused as I was. While we're up there, we can see the slow glow of the car driving off, and we both feel pretty scared now. Fortunately, nothing else happened, but to this day, I still have no idea what that thing was. I don't really believe in the paranormal, and I'd like to say it was my mind playing tricks on me, but why does so many of the other workers there know about this? Why has this been going on for so many years? I can never solve this, and I kind of don't want to because it scares me too much. When I first returned from the war, I was a power line rigger. This was on EHV lines, which are extra high voltage, the kind on top of the steel towers. Those are transitional lines, not sub-transitional like most inner city lines. So anyway, I had a job during a heavy windstorm in 2008 to go out and repair some lines near Colorado and the New Mexico border. It was great pay, since it was an emergency call out, so I agree. I met up with my crewman and head down from the Colorado Springs area. We get there at around 9 PM and start getting to work. Windstorms are notorious for failing lines, but not EHV or UHV lines, since they are rigged differently. When I crane up to see the broken link on the tower and inspect the damage, I remembered seeing over the tops of most trees. I observed the view for a moment and saw some nearby lights from a campfire. As soon as I saw the light, I hear yelling coming from that area. Now it must have been about 300 yards away, but I hear a woman yelling. She kept saying, "Someone please help," over and over again. I crane down and start yelling for the guys. They heard it too, and were asking questions. This is really odd. We never see anyone out there. I told them about the campfire lights coming from the direction our trucks were facing. We jump in one of the smaller trucks, since it's a 4x4, and head down the road. We look everywhere for the light, but don't see a thing. We drove back and forth, and then back again and slowed down. We rolled down the windows and stopped the truck in the area where the light should be. We all heard moaning sounds coming from the right of our trucks, so to the north. It sounded like two people are having heart attacks, and I mean really loud. So now we're on edge. The site supervisor was calling the police now. Given the general area we're at, they told us to check to see if we feel safe. Because I have the war veteran attitude, I decided to look. Two guys came down with me, and our supervisor stayed with the truck to wait for police. Apparently, they had a station not too far, like 15 minutes or so away. I armed myself with a pickaxe, and the other guys had conduit pipes like 1 inches. We all start walking through the trees with our headlamps on. because it got really dark now. The moaning's still coming from ahead of us. We got through the trees into a small clearing. It looks empty. The moaning stopped. We check around and hear nothing. We went back to the truck, and as soon as we got there, we heard the woman yelling again, yelling the same thing. "Someone please help." It was just to the north of where we were. One of the guys yelled back saying, "Where are you?" and gets no reply. Then we hear her scream in pain, and nothing else. We're already running back north and called the police, but they've showed up. They must have seen us running north because two of them came after us. We stopped in the field area and they stopped with us and asked what was going on. We told them. They helped us look around and saw nothing. We walked back to the truck and didn't hear anything else. They said they would hang out for us and check if anything else happened, so we get working again. The police are now parked next to each other, talking while we worked. When I craned up, I can't see any campfire lights or anything. We did the job. Took about an hour and a half until we're done. When we were packing our tools to head out, one of the cops left and the other comes with us. He told us that just to the west, there was a small plane that crashed and people burned to death. He said the police and paramedics got to the scene and the fire's still going. He told us about how two bodies were found away from the plane, crawling away from it, and one of the bodies is still there somewhere buried from the 70s or 80s. Yeah, we packed up fast and got the hell out of there. Now I never saw a fire, just light on the trees. Now I can't tell you how creepy that stuff is to find out afterwards, and the voices and moans were so clear. I always kind of believed in the afterlife after this, but God, did it mess my head up. I'm so glad other people were there to experience it though. The cop believed us too. But didn't hear anything about reports of a fire or anything else in the area afterwards. Back when I was a Boy Scout, I took a weekend-long training course called National Youth Leadership Training. One of the last parts of the course was an overnight hike into the woods, with no guide, to find our designated campsite and see how we would work under stress. We finally got to our campsite and began to unpack. We each bought a tent, but half of us left ours behind to lighten the load and buddied up. Lo and behold, my buddy brought a one-man tent only. Either I slept outside or things are going to be really cramped and I didn't want that. The sky was clear and I slept under the stars. The next morning, 4 of the other guys claimed that they saw a coyote walk up to me, sniff my face, stare at me, and leave. They were too scared to go and make it leave. They stuck to their guns though, but I didn't believe them. 4 years later, I was working at the camp as a staff member, and I'm speaking to a senior there, and apparently he said coyotes are pretty common there, and they often boldly show up. It made me realise what the guys were saying wasn't a lie. I just can't believe they let me sleep with a coyote literally at my face. God knows what would have happened if I'd woken up. I went camping with some friends near Lochmond in Scotland. We set up camp about 3 miles into the woods near a small river and got the fire going to cook some food we brought with us. The site is very remote, but in the evening a couple of guys hiked through and stopped to chat with us. They're from Poland and seem friendly enough, but ask a lot of questions about our group, how many we were, etc. And I'm a bit suspicious, but I put it down to being from different cultures. It's around 10 PM. I start to feel very ill, and I'm thinking, is it possibly from food poisoning? Now, I'm very confused about this because I'm sure the food was cooked correctly. My friends are all pretty drunk, and I had drunk about 4 or 5 cans of Budweiser. Stupidly, I packed my bag after throwing up hard for 15 minutes and decided to hike back to the main road, watching light fading in the distance. I'm about a mile into the hike back. At this point, I've been sick twice and am completely sobered up by throwing up so much. I've got sports bottles full of water. I now stop to rinse my mouth out. At this point, it's near pitch black, so I got into my bag to get out my torch, small knife and my .22 air gun. As I start zipping my bag back up, I hear twig snap nearby and assume it's a rabbit or fox. I shine my torch, but there's nothing. This doesn't make sense because surely I'm at least going to see reflective eyes, but oh well. 5 minutes later, I hear what sounds like running, maybe 100 yards behind me, and lots of twigs snapping. I turn around and assume it's my friend, and I say, "Are you kidding me?" I said I knew someone's there, and I'm not joking. I see movement through the trees probably 80 feet away. Whatever this is big. I mean 6 or 7 feet tall and completely black. At this point, my sickness is gone, and my heart's beating through my chest. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I get this feeling that I can only describe as feeling almost dizzy at the surreal position that I found myself in. I take off my rucksack and hang it up. I kill my torch. I still think it's my friends, but I have this horrible feeling. It was too big. I've got my knife though in my jacket pocket, and my pistol gripped harder than I can possibly ever do normally. I walk in the darkness for about 100 yards and stop dead behind a tree and wait. I'm trying my hardest to control my breathing, but it's supremely difficult now. Sure enough, I hear movement again. Very difficult to pinpoint, but it's getting closer. Now I'm caught in two minds, to continue to hide or confront. I decide the latter, and now I burst out from the brush. I'm in two minds, but I have to run now. I point my torch in the general direction of the sound, and there's branches moving. I start moving away from the area like an SAS trooper. I hear distance movement again. Lots of twigs breaking now, from heavy footprints. I don't see anyone now, but I know I'll shoot them. Silence now. I wait a few minutes and head back for my backpack. It's not hanging over the branch anymore. It's on the ground. That's the scariest part for me. Whatever I've been chasing could have never beaten me back to my bag. So something or someone else moved it. The branch is intact, which doesn't make sense either. At this point, I tabble out onto the main road pretty sharp with no incident. I call my fiancée, who quickly picks me up, and I'm violently sick. I believe it's from fear. I tell her about what happened and she's freaking out. To this day, I still don't know exactly what happened. I do know I was terrified, and I've never experienced anything like it before or since. I've had a truly weird encounter before. I lived in Southern California at the time, up in the San Gabriel Mountains, a couple of hours east of LA. I know when people think of Cali, they all seem to think of the beaches, but I assure you, the land here is very diverse. My hometown is super tiny and has a fairly popular ski resort on the western side of town. If you take the only highway out past the ski resort for several miles, there's literally nothing but forest. And a very old gold mine is actually still there, and it's kind of cool. After those things, there's nothing but national forest. And then, one insanely isolated, very old restaurant that still functions, and then back to the forest for a long time. Anyway, just setting the scene. I was about 10 or 11 when this happened. It's almost Christmas. It snowed heavily, and the snow's still falling on the evening of this happening. My stepdad decided that we would cut down our own Christmas tree this year, so we get into my mum's big Dodge truck and headed off to the mine, which is a couple of miles past the ski resort. We got to the base of the road and were talking and laughing, etc. My stepdad was driving pretty slow since it was snowing decently. They had ploughed part of this road recently too, and there were big snow berms on either side of us, down near up to the top of the truck, probably 8 feet off the ground. So it's just barely getting dark now. Not quite dark, but twilight, I guess. So not dark enough that we can't see anything, but dark enough that the headlights of the truck are on. Quite suddenly, from over on my side, there comes a huge dark shape that arches over the top of the snow berm. It lands in the middle of the road fairly gracefully almost. My stepdad slams on the brakes. I am too stunned to speak or even scream, because there crouching in the middle of the road is some creature. It has a long muzzle and pointy ears, covered in fur. Now, I have really never seen anything like it. This all happens in seconds. The thing jumps down and crouches, glancing at us. My stepdad slams on the brakes, and then it just vaulted up and over the beam and disappeared. It must have been 6 or 7 feet tall. I have never seen anything quite like it. My stepdad refused to talk about it when I asked, terrified. If he had seen the same thing too, I knew he did because how quick he braked, and he was wide-eyed and white for the rest of the journey. I never did bring it up again because we hadn't had the best relationship since then, but sometimes I wish I could know what actually happened then. It still shakes me to my very core, even to this day. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and tons of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. Or there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places. A lot of the people from where I am are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I do a lot of work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of them small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there for too long. No opportunities or chances for the people that fairly deserve it. And nothing for miles around, like honestly, you're trapped there. I hated it. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service for miles or houses. In the past, there's been a lot of vehicle break-ins on the trailheads. I mean, literally, the gravel there is littered with bits of broken glass from what I can only assume is break-ins. Sometimes, there's really shifty people hanging around those trailheads or just driving around out on the forest roads. There are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat up $500 cars barreling along them that are meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 friends of mine and I decided to play paintball in the National Forest. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip, so we can play the next morning also. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the most popular camping spots. Sadly, a church group or something had taken off all the spots. This really got us annoyed. This was really the only camping spot that we're familiar with, and it's getting late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further into the woods. By now, it's getting dark, and we're getting worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but no service of course. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That being said, it looked like a 4x4 had been going over the mound, so it's worn now. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over it. Now, there was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove for a few miles down the road, coming across an opening next to a creek. There were some blue traps hanging over a plywood nailed to a tree. That's odd. That said, it was pretty much dark now, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up in the tent. After we set up, I start noticing there's a lot of trash in the woods. I see a green bottle on the ground. I took a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of some home and garden insecticide. I was really tired now and thought someone was dumping some garbage here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage here when we're more than an hour away from the nearest home. We set up camp, have some beers and made chili from scratch. By this time, it's probably 11 PM and we're eating. We noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles don't make sense. It seemed like it was far too bright and wasn't moving. It's a kind of glow you see over a big bright city, and we don't see the light source itself. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it's not campers. The hill was about a quarter of a mile from our campsite, and we investigate. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have done it. However, we had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and 2 of us decide to look. My other friend decides to stay. He's gonna do some popcorn on the fire. So we start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. It could have been beavers, but why would they go all the way around a tree in a perfect circle? We start talking about the ghost in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top, my friend falls and yells out. A few seconds later, the light goes out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what it is after all. Walking back in silence and keep on looking back every few seconds, we decide to turn off our flashlights and return to the campsite with the moonlight guiding us. We get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite. I can see my other friend Isaac walking around. He's wearing a hooded coat that I've never seen him wear before. For some reason, he has a paintball gun. That seems odd. We look at each other. The fire's dying down. We don't see the campsite well. Now, we've been gone for an hour. From the distance, it appears as though my friend is looking for something. He kept walking around the site and peering in. When we're almost back to the campsite, we see our friend walk up the road we came from. We figure he's went to the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to our fire waiting for him to return. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent and vomits. After we left, he had a few more drinks apparently. We ask him why he's wandering around with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange face and says, "They're locked in the cab of the truck." "Did you unlock it?" "No." We go to the truck and enter the door code and see our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck are hidden underneath a magnetic fob. I get a sinking feeling. What were you doing after we left? I watched a movie then fell asleep. But wait, you were walking around with a paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? He said he'd been in the tent the whole time, wearing the same unhooded fleece. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't him. At this point, of course, we're all too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, we just fold it with the sleeping bags and think, heck, jumping in the F-150. When we get up to the dirt hump, we see something grey blocking our path. The metal barrier that's been laying in the woods is now erect. By this point, we've all sobered up. No one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of my truck, so I slowly tap it. It falls over, and we drive very slowly over it, terrified we're gonna pop one of the tires and be stranded. It didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it on the moonlight. I now begin to drive as quick as I possibly can. The vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It just stays 1 or 2 turns behind us, but always follows. After 45 minutes of speeding, we get back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my home and decide to go a different way. I've never experienced anything like it in my life. Rural camping can be very dangerous, and we've never went back there since. Red River Gorge is a beautiful and huge park full of wildlife, rock climbing, waterfalls and dense forests, gorges and beautiful views. The place feels truly isolated, disconnected from the rest of the world. One evening, my boyfriend D and I decided to go camping at the gorge. We went out and tried to find a campground that was as backwards as possible. Sites were spread far from each other. Our site That was on the edge of a very steep drop-off. We arrived at sunset and quickly set up. By the time we're fully set up, the sun had set and we began making a fire. About 20 minutes into relaxing, we began to hear howling that doesn't go away, and it doesn't sound like it's far from us. We're both freaked out by the realization that there were wolves nearby, but we tried to not overreact and continued to sit by our fire. 10 minutes later, I start hearing a faint yelling about 15 feet away past the cliff's edge. Now, I told Dee to be quiet and listen, and we're both frozen out of fear. A woman was now screaming. I couldn't make out any words at that point, but it was a deep, gurgling shriek, a noise that I've never heard a person make in my life before. Then I heard it. She was screaming, "Help, please someone help. Someone please help me," repeating this over and over again, howling at the top of her lungs. I'm terrified. She could have been turned around in the dark and fallen off the cliff. She could have been attacked by wolves or a bear or bitten by a snake. At this point we both sprinted into my car, frantically climbing inside, locking the doors. I tried calling the police but have no service. I threw the car in reverse and sped down the dirt road to find anyone that could help. The shrieks continued. I didn't make it far before I found 3 young men standing on the edge of the forest. I slowed down and cracked my window, still hearing that woman begging for help, and asking the men if they heard that. How could they have not heard it? I told them it was a young woman screaming in the forest. Then, 2 of them went sprinting into the darkness. Without questioning me or anything, the other one just stood by my car, assuring me he had no idea what was happening. While the 2 men were somewhere in the forest, I drove further down the dirt road until I found a spot to turn around at. When I came back, the screaming had stopped, and the men were back by the side of the road. I slowed down and asked them where the woman was, and one of the men that had run into the woods said, "Don't worry, it was actually just a kid messing around." I just said okay. I drove back as quickly as possible. We left the campsite and went straight home. Once out of the woods, we called the local police station multiple times to no answer. I know it wasn't a child. I've never heard such primal screams in my life. It made my skin crawl and my heart race just thinking about it. What did those men do that night? What was I a witness to? I live just where farmland meets the edge of the suburbia, on an island off the coast of BC. The climate here is sub-temperate rainforest, so the natural and untouched landscape is incredibly wild, dense and lush. I'm keen on endurance cycling, and I take full advantage of the trail network in the forest surrounding my area. I work long hours, so most of my winter rides are in complete darkness with my trusty trail light. One section of my home trail winds through a rainforest bog full of hundreds of trees. They're huge. It's absolutely beautiful in daytime. It feels like a magical place with shafts of sunlight piercing the fog, hundreds of different species of flora, and there's so many wild animals out there. It's really beautiful. Now at nights, my gut starts tightening as the thought of passing through this mile-long section of trail appears. One day about a year ago, I was lucky enough to get a chance to go for a ride through it, so I took it. It was cold and very rainy, with few other people out on the trail. I had packed thermos of hot coffee in my backpack, and I thought the rainforest-style bog was the best place to take a rest as any. Now, I chill out. I have an interest in botany, so I was looking closely at the lynches growing off of the huge Douglas fir. But suddenly, I felt distinctly not alone, no biggie, Lots of people use the trail, although not many are out there that day because the weather's so wet and cold. And that's when I heard it. A meow. That's odd because this isn't a good place for a cat to be alone. We have cougars and bears, but I hear a meow again. Except this time, it was canned and robotic sounding, like somebody playing a bad audio file with a cat. My gut starts to clench. It just sounded wrong somehow and I can't figure out why. My hands were shaking when I unzipped my backpack to put my coffee thermo back in. I felt waves of nausea roll over me and the air suddenly felt dense and thick. I was in a rainforest surrounded by trees and moss, but I felt like I can't get enough oxygen. I hadn't seen anyone for at least 10 miles, and I was distinctly aware of how far I was, and I couldn't really get any cell reception here either. Now, I hear the same meow again, but this time closer. I've never heard a cat like this before. It sounded like an imitation of a cat or a person saying meow. It was so tiny, cold and robotic. I now know that without hesitation, it's time for me to go immediately. I was panicked on the inside, but can't show fear, so I casually slung my leg over my bike and start riding. As soon as I got out of the bog, I ride the rest of the way home like a bat out of hell, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't see anything. I will never forget this experience for as long as I live. I've had some pretty disturbing things happen on my night rides, but nothing ever like this. I hate the fact that clearly something was imitating a cat, and I'm sure it was a recording. God knows who was out that deep into the forest too. I just hope I don't encounter this again. I used to love going for long hikes in the forest near where I live. I usually did it on summer's evenings. Yeah, I know this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I always had my hunting rifle on me anyway. I mean, I'd be stupid not to. All it takes is one wild animal to go for you, and if you're unarmed, good luck to you. So anyway, I set out one summer's evening. I had my iPod playing some really chill songs and I felt really good about myself. I can't really get cell phone signal where I go because the trees cover it, but I like listening to my music. Now I was a good 40 minutes into my hike. There was enough moonlight for me to see where I was going. That's how I normally planned my hikes, when the moon was out of its brightest on the most clear days, so I can see everything. I'm really enjoying myself this night. I found true tranquility. I decided to stop for a minute, take off my headphones, and just pour out some of the hot chocolate I had in my flask. Now the second I do this, I have the feeling that I'm not alone, and I can't describe this feeling. It's almost like I'm comfortable in my own presence, but I don't want to be joined by anyone else. And this unsettles me. I just think I'm just being a little paranoid. I say to myself, thank God I've got my rifle, and I could have sworn I heard a laugh afterwards. No, it must have been just an animal, surely. So I go about drinking my hot chocolate. As I do so, and I'll never forget this, I hear someone whisper behind me, "Mind if I have some?" And a terrifying laugh follow. Now the next few seconds is a complete blur as I fumble, fall over getting up, grab my rifle and scream myself and sprint in the complete opposite direction to where I heard the voice and back onto the trail. I try and scream out that I have a gun, but I can't get the words out. What's worse is I hear rustling behind me. I continue sprinting up the trail, only to slip temporarily again, and now on my back. I lay there wondering whether it's better to pretend I'm still. I look behind me, and I can see what appears to be the butt of a cigarette lit in the distance. Well, Looks like I'm gonna keep moving then. I get up again and scream I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's worse, I'm sure I hear laughter in the distance after saying this. I sprint all the way back to my car. I don't even bother going back for my flask for anything. I immediately get on my radio and call it into the park rangers in the area, who say they're going to check it out and they want me to show them exactly where it is. I say you've got no chance and speed out of there. And the whole drive home, I can't stop thinking, who in their right mind was out there? How long were they stalking me for, and what on earth did they want? They clearly weren't mentally sane, whoever or whatever this was. Now, I don't believe in the paranormal, but this could have easily been something like that, because why would you be out there with no torch or anything? Maybe it is an insane person. All I know is that I never got to the bottom of it, and I never went out on my own in the woods at night again. Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing great today and I hope you enjoyed these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon for early access to my videos and my podcast in the description below. I have a quick message before the story starts as always, so if you want to go straight to the stories, then I have timestamps in the description below. But today I'd like to share this. So remember, if you're struggling with your mental health and you're feeling down about it, it's okay and it's normal. Just make sure you go out and get therapy for it, and don't worry if the first therapist you find isn't right for you, and the first therapy techniques aren't correct. It's a process and it's a part of it, and it's not going to be perfect the first time, but trust me, there's a right one out there for you, and it can make a massive difference when you find them. And remember, with getting better, it's a process, and there's always going to be ups and downs, so don't worry about this too. There's always going to be bad days you have, but try not to view it as a failure. Just view it as a part of the process of getting stronger, and that it takes some time. But everything can turn around, and it will for you. I promise you that. And I believe in you, and you're not alone in the struggles. And remember to make sure you have some goals and things to work on. For me, that makes a really big difference with everything, and I have to usually have things I'm working on. Well, actually pretty much always, so it's just a thought. So I hope that helps people, and I hope you enjoyed these stories. Take care, I'll speak to you all soon. Now, I worked as a fire lookout, and one of the most scary things that happened to me was while I was actually away from work for a day. I had a family emergency and couldn't actually be at this post that day. Now, when I returned, the whole fire tower was actually on its side and had collapsed. Apparently there was a design flaw that nobody knew about, and luckily the person covering the tower that day had actually stepped out on a patrol and wasn't present. But it's safe to say whoever would have been in it would 100% have died if they were there at the time of it collapsing. I work as a park ranger, so I got pretty used to hearing the sounds of the forest on my own at times. Now, there was one particular time that I kept on hearing somebody's name being called out, but I couldn't figure out exactly where it was coming from. I thought this was bizarre because usually you can at least triangulate where something is, but this time I had no clue. I then realised that it was calling out my name constantly, and it kind of worried me a bit. I then headed over and finally found out where the source of the sound was coming from. And just on the ground, I can see a walkie-talkie that's been smashed up. I pick it up and inspect it, thinking maybe this is the source of the sound, but I still can't figure out exactly where it's coming from. I look off, and to the side up in a tree is a Bluetooth speaker constantly repeating out my name on a loop. It's needless to say I noped out of there and quickly radioed in what happened, and we got the police involved. They eventually get the speaker down, We do a thorough search of the area and can't find anyone. And that's what haunts me. We still have no idea who did it to this day, and whoever put it up there did a good job because there was no fingerprints whatsoever. I ended up leaving that job soon after, and I'm still a ranger, just in a complete different area. I'm a fire lookout, and I have a story I'd like to share with you all from a good few years ago. One day while I was on the job, I headed down to go and get some more water, and I ran into another hiker. He seemed a bit dazed and confused to see people, looking like he'd been out in the forest for a long time. I said hey and he said hey, asking if I knew directions to a certain part of the area we're in. I said yeah and guided him over there. He said oh thanks, and quickly scurried off. I didn't think much of it, thinking it was just a normal hiker out there. Well, about 3 years later I was watching the news when I saw his face flash on the screen. He'd just been captured for evading the police for a good few months in the area that I was working in, living out in the forest. He had been known to kill multiple people, and I ran into him that day. So I was working as a prospector assistant in central Manitoba one summer. We were doing a helicopter-assisted magnetic anomaly investigation. Really the best summer ever. There's nothing like the ringing in your ears dissipating after the helicopter has dropped you off and the slow increase in a volume of bugs taking its place. You for sure know that you're in the middle of nowhere. It was the last day of our campaign. There was a little piece of property close to the edge of the road that we didn't need a helicopter for. It was a low priority target that we saved until the end. Now we really did so well during that we're happy to have an easy in and out of the bush. Around 9 AM, we heard yelling in one bush. Odd, nothing should be there. We kept on grabbing samples and it's in the back of our mind. Around 11 AM we hear it again, this time closer. We call back yet it's silent. Now though, during our travels of this 30-kilometer piece of property, we come across many pieces of animal evidence, deer, moose, rabbit droppings everywhere. A few other things here and there, even bear tracks and feces, but nothing prepares us for what's next. Around noon, we're in an old blast hole from the 80s. Prospector Dave told me he used to have a blasting license and blow stuff up in the middle of the forest while drinking beer as one of his favourite pastimes. Now that's until they changed the laws after a couple mini forest fires. Now we're facing due west with our GPS on some rocks getting the most precise UMT it could. We then hear an earth-shattering, bone-chilling howl. I look at Dave and he turns white. I picked up the GPS and put it in my belt and unclipped the bear spray for safety. Then, at our 9 o'clock facing due west, another wolf. Then, at our 10 o'clock, another, and another, all the way towards the 4 o'clock position. Dave calmly said, "We need to leave, but you can't run, or you die." We left most of our sampling stuff there. We also carried these modified steel sledgehammers for breaking up rocks and stuff. Most useful thing ever, really. It's at the ready along with the bear spray as we walk. Now it was the longest walk of my life and we didn't say a word. I didn't hear anything, but I'm positive they followed us back to the road and into the truck almost. We drove back to the next town and then drank thoroughly. I worked as a tree planter in northern Ontario, living in tents in very remote parts of the forest, like hours away from civilization, which was only accessible by logging roads. The strangest thing, however, was from a fellow planter who found a backpack in the middle of his area with shoes, clothes, a wallet, school ID and camera. How it ended up getting there is a total mystery to us. The scariest for myself was waking up to see that my tent had collapsed and finding a large bear paw rip apparently happening while I slept. as well as turning a corner to see a large wolf about 10 feet away, and returning to a spot I'd been about 5 minutes earlier to find fresh mama bear and cub prints, realizing a bear family had basically surrounded me, then turned away while I was sleeping. I was hiking in a national forest with my wife and my dog. The first couple of miles of the trail led to a waterfall and swimming hole. It was fairly well populated with people. We decided to hike past the waterfall, which involved a bit of a climb. Enough at least to keep most people from going past the waterfall. We hike another mile or two without seeing somebody. The whole time my dog was having a great time, happy to be in the woods and happy to walk for 30 minutes if we let her. Suddenly, in a particularly dense part of the trail, she stopped and refused to go ahead. She absolutely would not let us move another inch forward. We stopped and listened and couldn't hear or see anything. The dog though started whining and trying to pull all of us to go backwards towards the swimming hole. I never saw her like that before or since, and I was certain she was legitimately afraid. Maybe there was a bear on the trail or coyote or serial killer hiding in the woods. I'll never know because we listened to our dog and decided to get out of there as quick as possible and maybe avoided some kind of gruesome death out there. This story happened to me several days ago, and it's mostly fresh in my mind, so I'd like to share it. I live in southern Oregon. My county is huge and sparsely populated. It's mountainous to the north, desert to the south and east. My buddy Donnie lived about half an hour from town, about 10 minutes from a resort on a lake in a heavily forested area. On this evening, I had driven out to hang out with Donnie, my friend. We had plans to take my Land Cruiser down some dirt roads. He said he knew of a Forest Service road off the highway that went up to the mountains and ended at a fire watchtower. It's fairly late in the afternoon when we took off, and the sun was already behind the mountains, so the lights fade in now. We left Donnie's house and hit the highway. After a short drive, we turned around onto the Forest Service road and started to head uphill. After a few miles, we were forced to stop abruptly due to a cat front-end loader sitting parked across the road. The equipment had been purposely parked in order to block the road. It was perpendicular to the road. The logs had been dragged onto the road to block off the shoulders. My friend Donnie said to me, "This wasn't here the other day, let's try another way round." We get out of the cruiser and the woods were nearly dark and silent, except for the wind in the pine trees. There was no easy way around the loader, nothing that wouldn't involve beating up the Land Cruiser. We decided that we're gonna head back down the road and find a different road up the mountain. After a short trip down the gravel road, we found a promising trail that would put us around the loader, up the mountain once more. So we take the trail, and after a short drive uphill, we saw the loader through the trees. Feeling satisfied, we continued on our way to the fire towers. Now we hadn't gone far. However, we noticed another odd thing, a shipping container which is really sitting just off the road to the woods, back in the trees. That definitely wasn't here, Donnie says, stating it certainly wasn't there the other day too. At this point, I started to feel uneasy. The woods were unnaturally still, even for evening. The weather had been nice, birds and small animals should still be moving around, right? Well, we decided to investigate the shipping container. I drove the cruiser through the brush and up to the container. It was like a dark colour, almost tanned but with no markings. The doors were actually padlocked shut, and we sat there uneasy, on edge for several minutes. The woods are growing darker, and we finally made the decision to leave. I turned the cruise back to the road and start heading downhill. "Oh dude, there's some guys in the brush," Donnie yelled. Now this makes me back out of my thoughts. Sure enough, out of nowhere seemingly, 3 guys were uphill, and they're coming towards us on the road. I quickly yanked the wheel and pulled the cruiser onto a side road, heart pounding. "Who are they? What are they doing?" I yelled. I felt my stomach drop when I realized that the road is on a loop and was bringing us right back to where we had just been. As the truck shot out of the side trail back onto the main gravel road, I realized that one of the guys was less than 10 feet from the cruiser. These guys know the woods, and the guys also knew that the trail would bring me back to them. "Hang on," I yell as I yank it into reverse. I managed to just dodge the man in the road with his companions running too. I pushed the Land Cruiser for all I could get from its engine. Now the engine's actually a bit old and I'm a bit worried about it. We're very careful while driving because the trees are literally whizzing past us and we go back towards a paved road. We finally hit the highway and decide not to drive towards Donnie's house. Instead, we took the highway back towards town. "Where did they come from?" Donnie said. Thinking back, I've actually not seen any other trucks or anything in that area like this just parked up and suddenly appearing. And they just appeared, running out of the brush. Now by this particular moment, we've actually gone several miles when I noticed lights coming up behind us on the highway. They were still quite far back, but coming up fast enough that they would catch up in a minute or so. I accelerated, determined not to be caught. We rounded a slight bend and I slammed on the brakes and drove the truck into the woods once again and turned off the lights. Moments later, a truck went flying down the highway past where we're hiding. We waited a few moments longer and then drove onto the highway, heading back to Donnie's house by taking many back roads. We didn't get followed now, and we didn't see anything out of the ordinary when we drove past the same spot on the highway where we originally turned. Now I'm really not sure what those guys were doing out there, or why they chased us. Two things are for sure though, they didn't want us there and they weren't planning on letting us go back there in the future. Now I live in a beach community with a maritime forest nearby, and while hiking about 40 years ago, found a massive sea turtle hanging from a tree. I bet the shell was 4 feet across. I figured somebody was hoping to recover the shell after the poor thing had deceased, but I have no idea how it got up there. Now, working in a rainforest in Southeast Asia many years ago, one of the things we did was trap moths at night. You sit in front of a big white sheet with a lamp in front of it powered by a generator, and then periodically go and see what insects had actually been attracted to the sheet. Incidentally, the insects attracted frogs, which then attracted snakes and whatnot. Due to the noise at night, the trap was about a mile away from camp, so you'd be there at 3 AM, all alone in the middle of the jungle. One cloudy night, after there wasn't much happening on the 1 AM to 3 AM shift, I heard rustling besides me. And that wasn't unusual, but it was a bit bigger than I was used to hearing. The rustling got closer and I started to get tense. It got closer still, and I was thinking that I'm gonna get eaten by a tiger. Suddenly, a disembodied face broke out of the tree line screaming in an unintelligible language. I have a heart attack, scream a little, and the disembodied face disappeared back into the woods, while simultaneously issuing high-pitched giggles. It was only after my heart slowed down that I realized that it's probably someone trying to scare me, but I'm still not sure. Now, I didn't see but heard, so my husband and I were hiking in a state park on the east coast. It was midday during the week, so we maybe encountered 2 other people the 3 hours we're out and about. The only sounds we heard are from ourselves, our dog, and some animals and birds, when all of a sudden, I started hearing mild chanting. I tell my husband if he heard it too, and he nods and tells me be quiet. My dog's ears were at full alert, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. We continued walking, and the noise turned into full-blown monk chanting. Think Halo Georgian chants. It was as clear as day, like standing next to a speaker. To make myself feel better, I convinced myself it was some teens hiding down playing it on their phones, and after 5 minutes of hearing it, it disappeared, and we barely spoke a word for the last 3 miles back. While working as a park ranger, there was one thing that a couple of us could never explain. Every so often, we would hear a strange calling out in the forest. Not like a normal sound, more like a chanting sound, but animalistic, if that makes sense. One day there was a couple of us going out on a patrol when we hear this sound again. My friend laughs and says, maybe it's our time to finally see Bigfoot, which we all laughed at. Then, crashing from a tree behind where we're standing, we see a figure that's roughly 7 feet tall, smashing through the trees, almost knocking them over while it moves, and there was an absolutely disgusting stench to accompany this. Its face almost looks like a wolf face, but it's pretty hard to see because it's so hairy. We all looked at each other in disbelief for a second, then glanced back as this thing quickly went off deeper into the forest. Now, one of my friends was convinced it was someone in a bear suit playing tricks on us, but the way it knocked the trees over was unbelievable, and it stank in this area for literally days afterwards. We did a big investigation, but couldn't find anything. Now, I worked in fire lookout towers for a couple of years. It's a job that I had thoroughly enjoyed, and I remember one particular event that I'd like to share with everyone. It's scary for different reasons than other stories that you're probably used to hearing on here, but let me explain. This happened during one beautiful summer's day. I'd been up in the tower for a couple of days and I was really enjoying my time. I was reading a couple of books and having a really good time. I actually like to write in my spare time, and I guess just English and writing is my passion in general. So the day started like any other. I'd woke up and made myself a coffee and checked in on the radio station to make sure that I was doing okay, and if there was any particular instructions. Also, I needed a weather forecast. I ended up talking to my other friend who wasn't too far away on another radio, and we just had a good conversation. After our conversation, I finished another coffee. I used the first one to make me wake up and the second one to enjoy it, and I used the toilet, as you can imagine from drinking so much coffee. I had some breakfast and needed to set out for a while. I had certain things I needed to go and inspect to make sure everything was normal. I count my way down the steps, which is something I always do just out of habit. I make it to the bottom of the tower and double check that I've actually closed the door and everything. And I can't remember exactly if I locked it or not, but I'm not too worried. I haven't seen anyone out here for a while. I then set out on the gravelly path. Now, the path itself is actually pretty nice because we have some gravelled areas, which is a lot better for your feet than walking over the true forest land. There's quite a lot of trees that have been downed, and I really have bad times slipping on these because I'm not necessarily too careful. I'm always taking in what's just ahead of me. I continue walking on my gravelly path and I can see the trees ahead of me are roughly 100 feet tall. They're really beautiful. I continue going forwards and make my way onto a small bridge. The bridge has been there for a while and it's made out of wood, and I know that might scare some people, but I think it's actually really cool. What's nice about the bridge is that you can see some fish in the water nearby it, with parts of a river that's running past where I am. The reason I like to walk this way too is I get to see parts of nature that I can't see up in the towers. Because of course, if you're constantly scanning the horizon, you don't necessarily get a chance to see what's actually going on directly underneath you. So I head over the bridge and everything's fine. I'm actually running a relative inspection on the bridge as something that I have to do, which is one of my duties. I continue walking along the stream now, which is really beautiful and picturesque, and everything's normal. I don't actually have my radio with me at the time though, because I just want to enjoy this part of the day, and to be truthfully honest, I've actually forgotten it. I'm not too worried though, because I've never had a radio call very early in the morning, and I'm pretty confident being out here on my own. I continue on my trek and make notes that nobody's been around here, and there's one area that I have to check out because there's been reports of people loitering around, but I can't really see anyone. I do find a strange kind of clearing that looks like people have been there recently, but there's no signs of life whatsoever. I think most likely it's some kind of animals that people have seen in the night time and mistaken them for people, so I just put it down as nothing. Now the whole time that I'm doing this, I'm constantly taking notes of my surroundings, making sure that everything's okay. The thing is, when you're a fire ranger, you have to remember that a fire can start at literally any time, and you're responsible for the safety of everyone in your area and the surrounding areas. It's a job that I took very seriously, so I was always on point with things like this. I continue on my short trek, and the trees actually changed slightly. They're a little bit more skinny now, and there's not really much of a path for me to follow, and there's lots of large rocks around. Now one good thing I noticed is there's lots of moss type things on the ground, which is very important because it means the air's not too dry, and hopefully it stops any fires spreading if they would start. Now as I'm walking, I hear a very loud thud sound. It literally sounds like something really big has fell out of a tree. I stop for a moment and think maybe it's a tree that's just fallen, or maybe an animal's fell out of it like a bear or God knows what. I have a look, and for the life of me, I can't seem to locate where the sound comes from. It was either that or some kind of Bigfoot. I laugh and continue onwards, thinking it's probably just a fallen tree. I make it up to a hill and I do some more surveying and everything's as it should be. I've now completed this part of my duties and I'm heading back towards the tower. I'm actually pretty happy now. The first part of the morning is actually always my favourite, and I like knowing that I'm out here mostly on my own. I've got another 2 or 3 days ahead of me up here, so I need to make sure I keep my mind occupied. So I decide to do some reading. I speak on the radio once again to my friend, and I tell him that I actually heard a strange sound, which was like something really heavy falling, but I can't figure out exactly where it's from. My friend laughs and says he's actually heard the same before, but not to worry about it. It's probably just some trees falling down where their time's come. I agree and stop what I'm doing. I hear another sound outside that sounds very similar to what I was just speaking about to my friend. I tell him there's something I need to check out and I'll be back soon. He says roger that. Over. I say over and head out. Now, I wasn't really sure what I heard this time because obviously I was talking to my friend and I wasn't necessarily engaged with what was happening around so much. And I realised that whatever it was must have been coming from near the stream. I think it's quite odd, and I'm worried that maybe it's somebody out here that's in trouble. It could also be from a fire where a tree's fallen, but I would know if it was a fire, and this sounded different. I ended up making my way along the rocks to roughly where I thought that I heard the sound from. I take a moment, pause, taking everything, but yet find nothing. Now just off ahead of me, I'm certain that I can see a person just off the other side of the forest, dressed in virtually all black, just going behind a tree. I think, oh, so that's a bear, so I probably need to get back now. I don't have any bear spray or anything like that with me because I've come out very quickly to investigate. I'm pretty worried because if this is a baby bear, then mama bear's going to be pretty angry, and God knows how many there are, and I'm not really ready to fight them. I think they were probably trying to get some fish in the water, or I don't know, so I decide to head back. I'm pretty careful to trace my steps and make sure that nothing's actually following me, and I can beeline back to the tower. I ended up making it back and I put a small barrier over the bottom of my tower. Now this is something that we had been told to do just in case of situations like this, but to be honest, I don't think it's going to make any difference at all really if a bear comes, but it's what I was doing. I'd made sure I disposed of all my food correctly too, so I knew they probably weren't coming up for food, so this meant they were probably angry at me for going into their territory. And then make my way back up to the top and I report to my friend and the other station that I think there's bears, and just to let the other guys keep a watch out, and that if I don't report back in time, to assume the worst. They say that's completely fine and they don't want me to investigate further, thankfully. I do keep an eye out, however, with my binoculars though. I'm now back doing my job looking for fires again, and it's starting to get a little bit dark now. I think this is good, because it means that the bears are probably going to eventually go off and do other things and try and get sleep or whatever they do, and I can have some more rest now. It's almost coming up to the part of the shift where I can sleep, so I'm pretty happy about this. Basically, another worker's going to take over from a nearby station that can overlook my area, and I can get some sleep. So, forgetting about the events from the day, I go into my bed and I have a really nice sleep. I wake up the next morning and I repeat my routine. I have a coffee where the first one's basically to help me wake up and the other one's something that I can enjoy. I still have to repeat the same things as yesterday and make sure nobody's loitering around or camping where they shouldn't be, so I grab my things and my radio this time and step down, counting my steps as I go. I go through the gate and I stop in my heels. That's odd. I was certain I left the barrier up that stops things going up into the station. I look around and make sure nothing else is off and there's no people or animals, but there doesn't seem to be anything. I go and investigate. I look for any claw marks or anything that signals that maybe an animal did this, but strangely I can't see anything. Again, I think this is pretty bizarre because I've not really experienced this before, but I just put it down to myself being tired and probably not thinking much, though I do actually take note of it this time as being something very weird. Now I continue on like normal and actually have to set out a different way than before. This time I don't get to go over that beautiful stream again, and it's actually annoying because I have to go to where I'm sure I saw a bear the other day. I'm a lot more cautious now and I have a bear spray with me which is easily within reach. I'm also armed with a weapon, but I'd rather not use it and actually save the bear if possible. But of course, if the bear spray doesn't work, then I'm definitely going to use it. So I head out again, and this time, it's a little bit different from yesterday because now, in fact, there are signs of life and people being here recently. There's the remnants of a campfire which has been put out recently and some other trash laid around. That explains why the bears were coming, and it's also quite dangerous because this could make a fire, and this is what my job is for, protecting against. So, I quickly report it in on the radio and make a note of it myself. One annoying thing is I now have to keep an eye out in case anybody's messing around. But who would do it that close to a station, I wonder? That's something that freaks me out a little bit. I think it's very bizarre that they don't care that I'm there and they have their own fire going. I think this is odd, but I put it down to being nothing, and I continue looking for further signs of life around, human specifically. I hear somebody talking on the radio now, and I tone in on it. I can hear people talking. They're saying, yeah, he's still moving around, we'll have to go and find him later. It's quite hard to make out exactly what they're saying, but some of the other fire workers or park rangers have obviously found some people messing around here that shouldn't be and are trying to locate them. I think this is good because at least I'm not doing this all on my own now. I ended up switching off to another channel, which is my main one, and I continue on. I don't find any other signs of life now, but every so often I am certain that I can see a tall silhouette figure in all black just off in the distance, just far enough that I can actually doubt what I'm seeing. I'm pretty sure this is a bear, but the weird thing is it was standing up straight now. So it means it wasn't a bear, but I don't know what else it could have been. I think this is pretty odd, and I just put it down to my mind messing with me a bit because of being out here for a while alone. I've now completed the main thing I need to do for the day and can actually head back again and just relax a little bit. Now when I get back to the tower, I'm sure that something's off. I can't describe exactly what it is, but the atmosphere just feels different. I once again put the gate down and I make sure that I'm 100% certain I've done this correctly, so I don't have to second guess and doubt myself like I did before. I have one look around for bears or other animals and I don't see anything and make my way up the stairs. Now when I get to the very top, I can just about make out a light coming from the area that I checked out the other day. Bingo, I think. This is it. A fire. I can go and report it in. I quickly go and grab my binoculars and take a closer look. I can just make out a red amber glow with the binoculars. Just as I go to radio it in, it goes out, like it didn't start. I begin questioning what I'm actually seeing, and I decide to actually step out from inside of the cabin thing at the top onto the balcony. I have my coffee in hand, and I realise that there's nothing actually there, but it's something I should probably investigate. I radio in what I'm seeing and that I'm going to investigate it, thinking there's a potential cause of fire not far from where I am, and head down. I count my steps again like normal, and thankfully this time the barrier's still in place that I put there before. I quickly hopped over it to save time, and somewhat excitedly head out with my flashlight. I make it to the exact spot where I thought I could see the red glow, and there's nothing there. I think this is really odd. I have quite a powerful torch and I'm scanning it around everywhere, but there's no signs of anything. Not even a cigarette on the ground, nothing. I don't smell smoke or anything, so I know that it's probably nothing, but I think it's pretty odd. Maybe it was a firefly or God knows what kind of insect I don't know about, but I'm just relieved that there's not going to be a fire, and I should be able to get a good night's sleep. And then quickly go back up to the tower, jump over the barrier again, and I'll speak on the radio explaining that there's nothing out of the ordinary here. I then head outside and go to grab my coffee again, and I realise something odd. I must have left it indoors and not realised. I look inside and it's nowhere to be found. I head out again to check the whole balcony and there's literally nothing. I think this is extremely weird because I know for a fact I had it there, and you can still feel part of the wooden balcony is warm from where I rested my cup earlier. So again, I think this is really bizarre, but maybe I'm just tired and need some sleep, I put it down to. I'm a little bit paranoid now, and I actually try and barricade the door a bit with the end of my bed. I close all of the blinds and radio in that it's my turn to switch off for the night, and someone else is going to take over the search for fire, and I gladly fall asleep. I wake up and I'm excited because it's only 2 days left and I get to go home relatively soon. Usually being out in the wilderness like that is something that I thoroughly enjoy, but not this time. Something was just off and I couldn't describe exactly what it was. I wake up and have my morning coffee, and I head out to just peer over the balcony and see how everything is and take in the nature. I'm leaning on the balcony and I put my cup down, and I have a double take moment. There's another cup of coffee sitting there. It's very cold and has clearly been there overnight and it's half drank. I realise then that this is a cup of coffee that I left there from the other day. Now what's weird is it's in a complete different place from where I would usually leave my coffee. It's very close to the edge, and I certainly didn't put it there. I'm very freaked out now and quickly throw it off to the side and take it inside with my new cup. I decided not to tell anybody about this just in case I was getting a bit tired and my mind was playing tricks on me from being lonely. And I report in that most things are normal and I'm gonna do my daily duties again. This time I take my coffee in a flask with me and I actually don't feel as safe in the tower as I usually do, and I'm quite happy to be getting away from it. I head down like normal and count my steps, and luckily nothing's disturbed my barrier. But this is odd now, because clearly something's been up there moving my cups around, maybe some animal, but there's no signs of anything. I have a look around and I can't see any claw marks or anything. Maybe it's a really small animal like a raccoon or God knows what up there, but that's really weird. How would it possibly know to move my cup and then put it back? And why would it have not just drank it and quickly gone off again? And why on earth would something want to crawl all the way up there? This was really weird now, but I decided that I should just get on with the day like normal and try and forget about everything that's been happening. I set off on my hike and begin. Now this day I have to head back over the beautiful bridge again, which is something I'm quite happy to do. I make my way onto the middle of it and I stop for a moment to take in the beauty of everything. I actually think about how lucky I am to have a job like this and how many great things I've actually had from working here. I met a lot of great friends and I've really found a true inner peace from being out in the nature. And I think I've learnt a lot about myself too, which is something I'm very happy about and still proud of to this day. Now while I'm standing there on the balcony, I hear a clapping sound, which I think's really odd. I laugh to myself thinking, oh maybe somebody heard my speech and thinking aloud, when I look up on the horizon and I can see a figure standing there, once again, dressed in all black, completely motionless, just out of sight of where I can clearly make out who they are or what they're doing. I shout out, hey, this time really frustrated, saying, what are you doing here? You know you're not supposed to be here. Who are you? And there's no reply. I explain who I am and say that I'm about to radio this in, and the boys are gonna come and find you. You're not supposed to be camping here. This is your last warning. Now this figure does not move at all, which starts to make me question whether it's an animal or not. I think, God, maybe Bigfoot is real. I've seen a UFO before and I doubted them, so maybe a Sasquatch is about to come and get me. Now I can clearly see this figure raising its hand to its mouth, then slowly sidestepping into the trees. I'm pretty convinced now this isn't a bear or normal animal, but who could possibly be out here? And why the hell are they doing this to me? What's worse is that I try and radio this in, but I can't get reception for some reason. I know my best bet now is to hike off a little bit up to a hill, and this is actually where I need to go. I feel confident enough that I should be able to hold my own if it comes to it in a conflict, because I'm relatively big and I've done some martial arts before, and I'm armed. But this is weird. I don't really have a choice now other than to go to the hill and radio in what I've seen. Now I'd like to say I did this fairly confidently, but I basically half sprinted and jogged all the way up to the hill. I quickly get onto the radio and say what's happened, and would you believe it? The controller tells me that I need to be 100% confident that this is a person and not an animal, and that I have to investigate. I say, are you kidding me? And I explain everything that's happened, and he says this is pretty bizarre, and to check in a couple of hours. I say a couple of hours, I might not have that long. What if there's a group of people out here? He laughs and says, don't be silly, come on, you've only got a couple more days left, and this is probably just your mind going a bit funny as it's near the end of your shift. I'll tell you what, you can go early tomorrow if you like. I reluctantly declined though, because I don't want to have to call this early and have them thinking I'm crazy and my reputation going. I quickly fill out the notes saying I've done all the checks I need, but I didn't. I didn't really look properly at anything when I was running up this hill. I'm just happy to be up the hill and speaking to another person again. I open my coffee and start drinking it, and it tastes pretty weird because it's been so shaken up by my jogging. But I'm pretty happy I can sit and enjoy this for a moment, and to be honest, I pretty much forgot about what happened. I start to calm myself down and say, you know what, maybe the controller was right. Maybe this is just my mind playing tricks on me and there's nothing for me to worry about and it's all in my head. I now take it one step at a time and somehow convince myself into continuing the rest of my checks. Now, I actually finished my searches without finding anything out of the ordinary. Call it Dutch courage or I don't know what because I didn't drink any alcohol, but the coffee seemed to give me some energy to investigate a little. I ended up going right to where I saw this figure standing and stopping for a moment to be still, to take in the surroundings. I can't see anything. Now, what I think is bizarre too is that I was a long way from that bridge, and I don't know how anything could have actually heard me up there. I could barely hear anything other than the running water now, and I think this is really bizarre. I take a moment to look around and my ears start ringing. I learnt later that this is out of fear and stress, but at the time I didn't know why it was happening. I can't stop the ringing from happening and I realise that I probably need to get back into the station. What's more annoying is I still have more to do this day. Just as I start heading up the stairs, I take a moment to look behind me and I'm sure for a second I can see another figure. I look to my left and right, but when I look again it's gone. I tell myself, calm down, everything's okay, you're gonna be fine. I still need to get into the tower and actually tell them that I'm okay and that I've investigated. To be honest, I only really investigated subconsciously. I don't really think it was a conscious decision, but I quickly hop onto the radio and explain everything. The controller says, see, everything's fine. Don't worry, we'll get the night watch to keep an eye on it for you. I say, oh yeah, thanks, great, that makes me feel better. He says just relax. If you're 100% sure and can positively identify that there's some people out here that shouldn't be, we'll send in the cavalry. And with that, I know all I can do now is say Roger and over, and he says the same, and to keep careful out there. Now, I decided to arm myself with both the bear spray and my weapon at the same time, which is something I didn't usually do, because I wanted to have every situation planned for in case anything else happened to me. Now, I actually ended up reading for a little while just to try and take my mind off of things. I felt extremely tired and was trying to keep myself awake. I decided to make another coffee and go out onto the balcony. It wasn't too far from sunset and I actually had a little bit of time left before I needed to go to sleep and call into the other tower to let them know that it was their turn to take over and that I was going to get some shut-eye. Now, I actually decided to call in a bit earlier this time and explain everything that had happened to the other worker who was going to be watching over me. I wanted him to know what the dangers were and that if anything were to happen to me, then he knew roughly what had happened. Thankfully, he completely understood and said that was crazy, and that some of the other guys had actually seen similar things before but equally had it brushed off in the same area that I worked in, apparently as recently as a couple of months ago. I said, great, why did nobody tell me that before? And he said we didn't really want to worry anybody out here, but we wanted to get live feedback too to know whether this was actually accurate or not. He recommended that I slept with the barrier down and that I also barricaded myself in and had my weapon ready next to my pillow, and this was exactly what I was going to do. I thanked him for the positive encouragement and actually believing me about what I was saying, and he actually said, without saying it directly, that they had some problems with the controller not necessarily believing what they were saying to them, and that the moment there was anything weird to give him a call and he'd be right over. I actually felt fairly nice now hearing this, and I was actually able to fall off to sleep relatively easily. Now, at one point I did wake up in the night and heard a banging sound, but I'm not sure whether this was just me, because I accidentally knocked my torch off my bed at around the same time, so I ended up falling asleep again. This time when I fell asleep, I actually felt pretty good, and I felt very happy waking up knowing that this was going to be my last day out here, and I didn't really have too much to worry about. I call in quickly to the tower and let them know that everything's okay, and I then thank my friend for doing his part and making sure I was okay. He says roger that, I'll speak to you in a couple of hours, over. I repeat affirmative, over, and start my day. Now this time everything seems normal and I'm actually a lot more happy than I was the last few days. I think the simple fact of speaking to somebody who actually believed in me made all the difference, and I actually felt a lot more confident now. I ended up heading out to the exact same area that I thought I saw something the other day, because I had to pass this way to get to the area that I needed to inspect, and I didn't really think anything of it, and nothing seems out of the ordinary. I even passed by the original campsite that I had saw, and I realised that nothing had been there since the time I last inspected it. The fire had gone long ago, and it made me feel a lot more confident. During my lunch break, I decided that I want to go back to the same bridge to just sit in the middle and relax. Now the biggest thing I was scared of now was maybe the bridge giving way, but I knew that was extremely unlikely. I ate my food there and just relaxed. I ended up laying on the floor, just with my hat down, looking towards some of the clouds. I can only do this every so often because it actually hurts my eyes, but tinting the hat down was really a beautiful thing. I start thinking about how lucky I am to be out here with the nature and animals, and that the animals seem to accept me here, and it's almost like they can sense that I'm not necessarily dangerous for them. I could be wrong, but I think some animals can actually sense whether people are nice or not, and this puts a smile on my face. While I'm laying here, I actually consider about making a novel maybe, and writing a bit about my stories, but I decide that's for another day, and that I have a long career ahead of me. I get up and everything's normal, and I make my way back down the gravel path. I like the sound of the gravel under my shoes, and I like all of the birds and whatnot in the trees. I make my way back towards the base of the tower, and everything's as it should be. I start to think maybe the controller was right and there was nothing for me to be worried about, and I head up, but I'm still not completely out of the clear. I still have to survive another night here, so I put the barrier down once again and make my way back up the tower, counting my steps like usual. I think this is just a habit I picked up that makes me feel better and more reassured in my situation, and that I haven't got to worry about anything. I get back to the top and I radio in that my shift's come to an end and I'm gonna call it in for the night, and in the morning I'll be returning back home. The controller says, "Well done, buddy. I told you there's nothing to worry about," and I thank him and sign off. I then call into the next tower over and say everything's fine, as he's about to watch my area for me. I take one last look with my binoculars for extra measure to make sure there's no signs of fire, and I now head in to my bed, once again fortifying myself here. Now I didn't want to fall asleep too quickly, so I leave my torch on above me so I can read. I'm reading a really nice novel that I picked up a couple of weeks ago, and I actually destroyed a few pages in my bag, and I was kind of making up in my head what the rest of the story should be. I didn't bother taping it up. I decided it was better that way. It's sort of become a part of me in a sense, if that makes sense. I have a good time, and before you know it, I was sound off asleep. I seem to fall into a very deep sleep this time because I don't actually remember dreaming or much of anything. I do remember waking up to a glow outside. I feel pretty happy because it means that my shift is over and that I'm about to head off home. I put my socks on and start boiling the kettle, then I take a moment to look outside. I realise it must be the very start of sunrise because I can't see much else illuminated. I start making my coffee and I realise something's off. I can't exactly put my finger on it, but maybe, just maybe, there's something not right here. I glance down at my clock quickly to get my bearings and it says 3 AM. Something's definitely wrong now. Why am I seeing any light at this time? Oh no, It must be a fire, I've realised quickly, and I suddenly feel with adrenaline. I quickly call into the tower that there's a fire very close to me and they ask for the bearings, but I don't have them yet. I say I'm about to find out and to stay on the line. I quickly grab the binoculars and I look to where the glow is, and I can see the start of a large fire. It's very close to the tower, so now I have to get out of here. I now scream over the necessary information about where the fire is, and I go quickly to take another look. I look to the base of the fire and I'm trying to figure out exactly why this has started. I look to the left and realise that there's a large rock obstructing the view, and a few other skinnier ones. I think this is odd because I haven't seen them before. I take a moment to let my eyes adjust and I realise there's 4 figures standing there in the fire. I let out a scream, and to my horror, just through the fire I can make out one of them waving to me. I realise instantly that I need to get out of here as soon as possible. I quickly grab my radio and run downstairs. I get down as quick as I possibly can and jump over the barrier. Annoyingly, I left most of my belongings at the time, but I didn't care now. What's worse is I don't have a torch. I realise, God, I didn't call in on the radio I was about to abandon post, but at the time I truly didn't care. Luckily I still had my small radio with me, so I quickly scream over to my friend what's happening at the other tower. He says he's going to let everyone know and just to make it over to him, which is great because that means at least a 2-kilometer hike. The worst thing is I don't have my torch, so I can't figure out exactly where I need to go. I look towards where the fire is after about a minute of running, and just as I approach the bridge, I realise I can't see any figures now, but the fire's spreading pretty quick. I decide that I'm going to stay close to the water because as a last resort this can probably save me, and it should eventually be able to get me over to my friend. Now when I'm sprinting, I hear a clap sound again. At first I didn't turn around because I thought maybe it was the sound of branches snapping from the fire. I continue jogging for another 30 seconds when I'm met with more clapping, just more distant. This time I'm almost frozen in horror and force myself to turn around, and I can see 4 figures standing on the bridge clapping me. I let out a scream and start sprinting again. I quickly hold onto the radio and scream what's happening, but I'm not met with anything other than silence. I try again and realise, God, I'm not at the area where I can get signal. I have to try and get over the hill at least. My feet actually feel like they're burning because they're not designed to go over terrain like this fast, but I keep going. Luckily, I'm relatively fit and I can keep up quite a decent pace. I run for a number of minutes and stop again to try and see if anyone's following me. I stop for a good couple of minutes until I can see a torch just off the path where I'd been not too long ago. I'm pretty certain I'm being followed now, and I have basically tumbled down the hill. I didn't mean to, and I ended up really hurting my legs doing so, but I basically slipped down the whole thing. I busted up my arm pretty bad too in the process. As I come to a stop at the bottom of the hill, I can no longer see the fire because it's out of the line of view. This is good for 2 reasons. 1, it calms me down a bit, and 2, it means my friend isn't that far away and help. I go to call in on the radio, but I realise that I've lost it in the tumble. I say, God, I can't believe you've lost this, to myself as I force myself back to my feet. What's worse though is I've had to adopt a kind of slow hikey pace to try and make it out to where my friend is because of my injuries. What's worse is where I have to jog now, I'm not really going to be able to see much further ahead until I'm basically at the base of his tower, which isn't really great because I could be going in the wrong direction now. And that's just what happened. For the first 2 minutes, I'm certainly going in the wrong direction. I stop for a moment to catch my breath and hide underneath a tree. Just as I do so, and I'm able to calm my thoughts and slow my breathing down, I'm met by a running water sound. I do a small prayer and thank God for leading me in the right direction. I now head very close to the stream, and I know this is going to lead me to my friend. I ended up wading through the water a little bit by accident because it's quite dark out now. I can feel blood on my arm and I'm a little bit worried about it getting infected, but that's a later issue. I decide I'm okay to walk a little bit now, and I continue onwards. I need to walk just to gather my breath and not make my injuries worse when I see more lights ahead of me. Oh no, they must have followed me when I slowed down and saw where I headed, I think, and I quickly ducked down in the water. I'm just off on the side of a bank and trying to hide myself amongst rocks. I don't know what to do at this point. If these people are ahead of me, I have no option but to hide. I decide the best thing to do is to get a visual, and I quickly peer over the bank. I see the lights again to my horror, but then after a moment I realise they're blue flashy lights. These are police, and there seems to be a few of them. I feel a wave of relief wash over my body, one that I've never felt before, as I re-emerge from the embankment. I head up the hill, and I go to shout out for help, but I stop myself, realising I'm not entirely out of the danger yet. I continue walking along the edge of the bank, and I eventually make it over to the path that leads to the tower. I have to be careful now because I don't want to make them jump and they attack me by accident. So I instead decide that I should call out the name of the other worker that's my friend. He then screams back to me, Mark, I knew you were there, Mark. Say quick, go help him. Where are you, Mark? And quickly 2 police officers rush over to me. I ended up collapsing to the floor and slowly telling them what has happened. This is at the same time they're starting to patch me up for my injuries. I say there's a group of people out there that have just set fire to next to the tower that were trying to hunt me down. They ended up calling it in to get more support and some other rangers to come and help out with the search. My buddy gave me a big cup of coffee and quickly put a blanket over me, helping me get into the car where I was driven off to get help for my injuries. The police were happy with the information I'd given them, and they decided not to bother me too much because clearly I was in a state of shock. In the drive over there, I remember just putting my head on the window and slowly drifting asleep. It turned out that I had sprained my arm and twisted my ankle, and I had a large cut, but luckily the police had done a really good job of helping patch that up, and I didn't end up needing to go to the hospital. I was taken home where I was able to recover, and the police took some more details from me. I thanked them for the help and they left. A couple of hours later, Mark came to join me. He gave me a big hug and said sorry for everything that happened to me. I explained everything and he said I did the right thing and not to worry, that I could have however much time off I needed from work. He then explained that the police did a large search and so did some of the rangers. He didn't end up helping out with it because he still had to cover his area, but he was very worried about me. He told me that the police didn't find anything initially, but they were going to continue searching and that they'd update me after what had happened, and that they were definitely going to press for criminal charges as soon as they captured him. He then said he really hoped he could get his hands on them first. Now the following weeks and months after that was a blur. Were actually a blur. I still struggle to remember much of it even to this day. I ended up leaving that job and working a similar one in a different area. I'd never had anything like it happen to me since, and as you can imagine, it still traumatizes me a bit to this day. I made contact with Mark a few times since and we're actually really good friends still. He actually quit his job there too the following day, and he does something completely different now, working in a wood shop. The annoying part about this is I never actually found out what come with the investigation, or whether these people were actually found or not. I just hate the not knowing part. I tried to make contact with the police, but they wouldn't give me much information about it, but I think it's important for people's safety. I still don't really know what to think of the whole situation. One thing I do know, however, is that it's extremely important for you to trust your guts and your instincts. You can easily play things off as being tired and oh, maybe you've just been out on your own for too long, but don't. Some of this is a survival instinct that was adopted and adapted years before we existed by our ancestors, and they were there for a reason. I don't know what would have happened too if I hadn't have actually woke up in time. Most likely the base of the tower would have set fire and it would have either collapsed or trapped me in there, and I wouldn't be telling you this story today. What's worse is I'll never know exactly why these people were stalking me and tried to get me like that. I haven't really done anything wrong to anyone, and that kind of haunts me a bit, that there's truly evil like this in this world. But I can tell you one thing, I'm never gonna sleep as easy as I used to, and I'm never gonna go back to that part of the country again. I just can't. Just the thought of it kills me. I've not been able to go camping since, or many of the other things that I enjoy. Even if I'm with a good group of people, I still feel terrified. I really hate thinking of what would have happened if I hadn't have woken up then, but I guess I can tell you that it's not worth thinking about, and that might be a story for another day, but thankfully it's not one that I have to share with anyone. So please, whoever's listening to this story, remember, trust your instincts, and never doubt that something bad could be out there. Always be well prepared for any situation and never rule out anything. I hope nobody ever has to experience anything like this. And I thank God that this didn't happen to someone who wasn't as experienced as I was. I think if I didn't have all my training and level of fitness, I again wouldn't have made it out of there alive. Thank you for listening to my story, it helps me getting this off my chest.